Hello?
Oh, good morning.
This is from United Bank. We're calling about the $480,000 business loan you co-signed for Mr. Jones last week.
What?
Hello?
Oh, your home has been listed as security.
What? No, I never signed anything. Hello?
Yes, I'm here.
We have a problem. The loan is frozen.
What? How?
It's tied to an unauthorized transaction.
Who would do that?
What did you tell them?
What? What happened?
Just answer me. What did you say to the bank? Mother, I need to know, please.
The bank called me at 9:17 on a Tuesday morning. Mrs. Murphy, before we release the $480,000, we need to confirm that you personally agreed to guarantee this business loan. I nearly dropped my coffee. What business loan? The woman went quiet. Then she carefully read my full name, my address, and the description of the Charlotte home I had owned outright since my husband died. My house was listed as part of the security. I never signed anything, I whispered. Within minutes, the bank froze the entire transaction. Then my phone rang again. It was my son, Daniel, and instead of asking what was wrong, he said 5 words that made my blood run cold. Mom, what did you tell the bank? Before I tell you what Daniel had done, I'd love to know what you would have done in my place. Would you protect your son or tell the bank the truth? If this story already has you wondering who you can trust, please like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. I was going to tell you. Daniel arrived at my house 23 minutes after that phone call. I know, because I watched the clock. There are moments when time seems to move differently, when every minute stretches, because your mind is trying to catch up with something your heart refuses to understand. That morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my untouched coffee in front of me and listened to the second hand on the old wall clock my husband Frank had hung there 20 years earlier. Tick, tick, tick. My son had used my name on a $480,000 business loan. My house had been listed as part of the security, and somehow Daniel had known the bank had called me before I had said a single word to him. When his truck pulled into my driveway, he didn't even bother closing the driver's door properly. He hurried toward the house still wearing the navy polo shirt with Murphy Renovations embroidered over the chest. I opened the door before he could knock. Mom. His face was pale. Come inside. Listen, I can explain. Inside Daniel. He followed me into the kitchen. For a few seconds, neither of us sat down. I looked at my son and tried to reconcile the man standing in front of me with the little boy I had raised. Daniel was 42 years old now, but I could still remember him at 7, sitting at this same kitchen table with scraped knees because he'd fallen off his bicycle. At 16, he'd eaten cereal here at midnight after his first heartbreak. At 23, he'd brought Rachel home and nervously told Frank and me that he intended to marry her. Those memories made what I had to ask almost unbearable. What did you do? Daniel ran both hands over his face. It's not what it sounds like. The bank says I guaranteed a $480,000 loan. I know. They say my house is listed in the paperwork. It isn't exactly like that. I stared at him. How exactly is a house listed as security without being listed as security? He pulled out a chair. Can we just sit down now? Mom, answer me. Daniel exhaled sharply. His expression changed. The panic was still there, but now I could see frustration underneath it. That frightened me more than the panic. I was going to tell you. I almost laughed when once everything was finalized, the bank was about to release the money. I know. So when were you planning to tell me? After the money was in your account? He looked away. That was my answer. I gripped the back of the kitchen chair. Daniel, did you use my name without asking me? I put you down as a guarantor. You put me down. It was temporary paperwork. I had spent 32 years working in payroll administration. I wasn't a banker, but I had processed enough deductions, garnishments, retirement contributions, and employee loan documents to know that the phrase temporary paperwork usually meant someone was hoping you wouldn't ask the right question. There is no such thing as a temporary guarantor on a $480,000 loan. His jaw tightened. The business is in a cash flow squeeze. A cash flow squeeze? We've got receivables coming in. I have jobs lined up. Good jobs. But I've got payroll materials, subcontractors. Banks don't understand construction cycles. Apparently they understand them well enough to lend you almost $500,000, not without additional backing. There it was. I pulled out the chair opposite him and sat. So you used me? No. Then what would you call it? I was trying to save my company. That isn't an answer. He leaned forward. Mom Murphy Renovations is not some hobby. I have 11 employees. 11 families depend on those paychecks. I've spent 12 years building this company. And that gives you permission to put my home at risk. You weren't going to lose your house. You don't know that. I do. How? He hesitated. The loan would have been paid back. I studied him. Daniel had always done that when he was frightened, answered a different question from the one he'd been asked. What happens if it isn't? It will be. What happens if it isn't? He pushed his chair back slightly. You're making this sound worse than it is. The bank froze nearly $500,000 because I told them I never authorized the loan. How much worse should I make it sound? His voice rose. I needed time, and you decided my name could buy it for you. The room became silent. Daniel looked toward the window. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. There is a commercial renovation project coming up. Medical offices, 3 buildings. If I get it, we're talking more than $2 million in contracted work over 18 months. If we're basically there. Basically isn't a signed contract. I know that. Do you? His eyes snapped back toward mine. That look hurt. Not because he seemed angry. Because for the first time I felt as though Daniel wasn't speaking to me as his mother. He was speaking to an obstacle. I folded my hands on the table. Did you sign my name? His expression changed immediately. It was subtle, but I saw it. Daniel. The paperwork was prepared electronically. That isn't what I asked. You know how these loan packages work? There are dozens of pages. I asked whether you signed my name. He stood and walked toward the counter. No one sat there practicing your signature if that's what you're imagining. That wasn't my question either. He turned around. The document processor already had an electronic signature. I stared at him. What electronic signature one from paperwork you'd signed before? I felt a chill move across my shoulders. What paperwork? I don't know exactly. You just told me where the signature came from. I said the processor had it. Who is the processor, Mom? You're getting buried in details that don't matter. They matter to me. He sighed. Everything is digital now. People reuse signature files. PDFs get stored. Forms get transferred. I didn't personally sit there and forge your signature. The word forge came from him, not me. I noticed that. So my signature appears on a document I never saw. He said nothing. Correct, yes. And you knew it was there. Another silence. Yes. My stomach tightened. Daniel quickly leaned forward. But I wasn't trying to steal from you. That's what you need to understand. I wasn't taking money out of your account. I wasn't selling your house. I wasn't doing anything to hurt you. You were promising my property to a bank. As additional support, without telling me. I was going to tell you. I shook my head. No, Daniel. You were going to tell me after I couldn't easily say no. His face hardened. You don't know that. I know you didn't ask before submitting it. He paced across the kitchen. You would have said no. The words slipped out so quickly that I don't think he realized what he'd admitted. I stared at him. He stopped moving. That I said quietly is exactly why you were supposed to ask. He looked exhausted suddenly. Mom, I was desperate. For the first time that morning I believed him completely. But desperation didn't make me feel safer. It made me more afraid. He sat again. I've got vendors calling. 2 customers are late paying. A project in Huntersville went over budget because the electrical subcontractor walked halfway through. I had to hire another crew at almost double the rate. Then one of our commercial clients pushed payment back 30 days. Why didn't you tell me? What was I supposed to say? That I screwed up? You could have started with the truth. I thought I could fix it. And when you couldn't, I found financing. In my name. With your backing. Without my permission. He closed his eyes. Yes. That single word hurt more than all his explanations. I remembered Frank telling Daniel something years earlier when he first started his company. Your reputation is the only thing nobody can lend you. Frank had believed character mattered most when money became tight. I wondered what he would have said if he'd been sitting beside me that morning. Daniel reached across the table. Mom, please, call Linda back. I moved my hand before he could touch it. And say what? Tell her there was confusion. There wasn't. You don't have to lie. Just say you want time to review the documents. I do want time to review them. Relief flickered across his face. But the money stays frozen. It disappeared. Mom. Until I understand exactly what you did. You're going to kill the deal. I didn't create this problem. You could fix it. I looked at him for a long moment. That sentence told me something I wasn't ready to accept. Daniel believed fixing his crisis was still my responsibility. I am not calling the bank today. He stood. Do you understand what happens if that money doesn't come through? No, I said. And I'm beginning to think neither do you. He grabbed his keys from the table. At the doorway, he turned around. I never meant to hurt you. I hope that's true. It is. Then give me every document. He hesitated. All of them. Fine. And Daniel, I want the original file containing my electronic signature. His face went still, for just a fraction of a second. Then he looked away. I'll see what I can find. No, you told me the processor already had it. I want to know where it came from. I said I'll look. He left. I watched his truck disappear down the street. Then I returned to the kitchen and sat alone. My coffee was cold. I replayed everything he'd said. Temporary paperwork. Additional backing. Electronic signature. You would have said no. But one sentence kept bothering me more than the rest. The processor already had an electronic signature. I went upstairs to the small room Frank and I had turned into an office after the children grew up. I opened my filing cabinet. Tax returns, insurance records, the deed to the house, Frank's death certificate, retirement documents. I began checking everything. 20 minutes later, I stopped. I knew where my signatures were stored. I knew which financial institutions had electronic authorization from me. And I knew which companies had ever received signed digital documents. Murphy Renovations wasn't one of them. I had never emailed Daniel a digital signature file. I had never authorized his office to store one, and I had certainly never given any loan processor permission to reuse my signature. So if Daniel was telling the truth about one thing, that someone already had a clean electronic version of my signature, then there was only one question that mattered. Where had they gotten it? And for the first time since the bank called, I wondered whether the loan application was only the part of the story I had accidentally discovered. The document I had never seen. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my name at the bottom of a document I had never signed. At 8:06 the next morning, Linda Carter called. Mrs. Murphy, I've spoken with our compliance department. We'd like you to come in and review the portions of the loan file connected to you. I'll be there. Can you come at 10? I can come now. There was a brief pause. 10 would be better. I arrived at the bank at 9:42. I had dressed more carefully than necessary: navy slacks, a cream blouse, and the small gold earrings Frank gave me on our 30th anniversary. I think I needed to feel like myself. Not Daniel's mother, not a frightened widow, not an elderly woman whose identity had been borrowed without permission. Just Paula Murphy. Linda met me in the lobby. She looked to be in her early 50s, with silver beginning to show at her temples and the calm expression of someone accustomed to delivering information people didn't always want to hear. Thank you for coming. Thank you for calling me yesterday. Her expression became serious. I'm very glad we did. That sentence followed me all the way into her office. A man named Robert Gaines from the bank's compliance department joined us. Linda explained, because the loan was now under internal review, there were portions of Daniel's business application she couldn't provide to me. But anything representing my identity, assets, or alleged consent could be shown to me. That's all I want, I said. At least I thought it was. Linda opened a folder. The first page contained my full legal name, Paula Elaine Murphy, my date of birth, my home address, my telephone number. My marital status was listed as widowed. Even the year Frank died was correct. I felt exposed in a way I had never experienced before. These details aren't difficult to obtain, Robert said gently. Some are public or available through legitimate records. Some. He nodded toward the next page. Linda turned it. My home was listed there. The address. Estimated market value. Tax parcel information. Mortgage balance 0. I stared at that word. 0. Frank and I had celebrated paying off our mortgage 9 years earlier. We opened a bottle of champagne on the back porch, and Frank joked that after 34 years, we finally owned every doorknob. Now that accomplishment had become a number in someone else's loan application. Who provided this? We're still establishing the document trail, Robert said. I looked at Linda. You told me my house was security. She chose her words carefully. The loan package represented your financial support as part of the credit structure. Your property information materially strengthened the application. Could I have lost my house? Robert leaned forward. There are legal distinctions depending on which documents were fully executed and what additional steps would have been required. I don't want to misstate that, so that's a yes. It means you were being represented as someone willing to expose personal assets to a business obligation. My mouth went dry. Without knowing it. Yes. Linda turned another page. At the top were 2 words. Personal guarantee. I stopped breathing for a second. My name appeared beneath them. I read the first paragraph, then the second. I didn't understand every legal phrase, but I understood enough. If Murphy Renovations failed to meet certain obligations, the lender could pursue the guarantor according to the agreement. Me. I thought about Daniel sitting in my kitchen saying, "You weren't going to lose your house." As though risk only mattered if disaster actually happened. Keep going, I said. Linda looked at me. Are you sure? Yes. She turned the page. There it was. My signature. Paula E. Murphy. For several seconds the room seemed to disappear around me. I had signed my name tens of thousands of times in 69 years. Birthday cards, checks, school forms, tax returns, hospital paperwork, Frank's hospice documents, his funeral arrangements. A signature becomes almost like a face. Other people might see lines and curves, but you recognize the smallest things. The long upward stroke on the P, the narrow loop in the L, the way I shortened the final Y when signing quickly. This signature had all of them. That looks like mine. Linda nodded. Is it? No. I moved the page closer. It was disturbingly accurate. If someone had shown it to me among 10 genuine signatures, I might not have noticed anything wrong. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I have never seen this document. Robert wrote something on his legal pad. You're certain I'm not confused about whether I guaranteed a $480,000 loan? I understand. I pointed to the signature. Daniel told me yesterday that somebody already had an electronic copy of my signature. Linda and Robert exchanged a glance. What exactly did he say? Robert asked. I repeated the conversation as accurately as I could. Temporary paperwork, document processor, old signature, electronic file. Robert wrote everything down. Then he asked, have you ever knowingly provided your son's company with a reusable digital signature? No. Have you ever signed financing documents for Murphy Renovations number business guarantees, number lines of credit? Never. Linda asked. Has Daniel ever had access to your personal records? That question was harder. Yes. How much access? He's my son. Neither of them said anything. I suddenly hated my own answer. After Frank died, Daniel had helped me with things I didn't feel strong enough to handle alone. He had carried boxes from Frank's office, helped cancel accounts, scanned documents, changed passwords on subscriptions, set up automatic payments for property taxes and insurance. He knew where I kept files. He had a key to my house. I had never considered any of that dangerous. Daniel has been in my home office many times, I said. Robert nodded. That doesn't establish where this signature came from, but it's relevant. Linda showed me another page, a copy of a property tax statement, mine. Then an insurance declaration page, also mine. I recognized the policy number. My skin prickled. I keep a copy of this upstairs. Could Daniel have accessed it? Yes, when any time. The word sounded terrible once I said it aloud. Linda leaned back. I want you to understand something, Mrs. Murphy. Our concern is not simply that incorrect information appeared in an application. The concern is that several independent pieces of information were assembled in a way that presented you as a willing participant. That distinction landed heavily. This wasn't one box checked incorrectly. Someone had built a version of me on paper. A version who wanted Daniel to have that money. A version willing to risk what Frank and I had spent decades building. How did you catch it? Linda looked toward Robert. He nodded. There was an inconsistency in the verification process, she said. The system flagged the file for direct confirmation before final funding. What inconsistency? At this stage, I'd rather not speculate beyond what we've verified. But if it hadn't been flagged, she hesitated. The loan was approaching disbursement. How close, Ferry? I looked at the signature again. Before he could spend $1. That was how close. One phone call had stood between me and a financial obligation I hadn't even known existed. Can I have copies of the documents representing your participation? Yes. We'll mark them appropriately. While Linda prepared them, I stared through the glass wall of her office. People moved through the lobby carrying deposit slips and coffee cups. Everything looked ordinary. That was what disturbed me most. My life had looked ordinary 24 hours earlier, too. Robert asked me to make a list of any documents Daniel might have handled over the previous year. I don't know if I can remember everything. Start with anything containing your signature. That narrowed it. On the drive home, I tried to remember. Tax forms, number, insurance, possibly. A beneficiary update number. Then, at a red light on Providence Road, a memory surfaced. 6 months earlier. A storm had damaged part of my roof. Daniel had insisted Murphy Renovations handle the repair. You're not paying some stranger, he'd told me. After the work was finished, he came into my kitchen carrying a clipboard. There's one insurance acknowledgement you need to sign. I remembered teasing him. Do I get to read the fine print? He laughed. Mom, it just confirms the work was completed. I had read the first page. Then Daniel pointed to the signature line. I signed. I took the papers. But now I remembered something else. There had been a second sheet beneath the one I signed, blank except for a few printed lines near the top. Why is there another page? I had asked. Office copy, Daniel said. At the time, I hadn't thought twice. When I reached home, I went directly upstairs. I pulled out the folder labeled House Repairs. The roofing invoice was there. Photographs were there. Insurance correspondence was there. But the completion acknowledgement I remembered signing was missing. I sat at my desk and opened the bank copies. Then I placed the signature from the loan beside an older signature from one of my insurance forms. Close. Very close. But not identical. Then I remembered Daniel had emailed me a scanned copy of the roofing invoice after the job was finished. I opened my laptop and searched his messages. There it was, 6 months earlier. Subject: roof paperwork. I downloaded the attachment. 3 pages. Invoice. Materials list. Completion acknowledgement. My pulse began pounding. I opened the 3rd page. At the bottom was my signature. I enlarged it. Then I placed the bank copy beside my computer screen. The upward stroke of the P, the narrow loop, the shortened Y. Not similar. Identical. Even the tiny break in the ink where Daniel's cheap office pen had skipped across the paper was visible in both. Someone hadn't imitated my signature. They had copied it. From this exact document. I sat completely still. Daniel had stood in my kitchen while I signed that paper. He had taken it back to his office. And now the same signature appeared on a $480,000 loan guarantee I had never seen. I wanted desperately to believe there was an explanation that would make all of this smaller. A careless employee, a software mistake, a processor who had reused the wrong file. Anything. But one fact would not leave me alone. The signature used to guarantee Daniel's business loan came from a document I had signed directly in front of my son. And Daniel was the person who had carried that document out of my kitchen. The paper in my kitchen. I stared at the 2 signatures until my eyes began to ache. One was on the roofing completion acknowledgement I had willingly signed 6 months earlier. The other was on a $480,000 personal guarantee I had never seen. They were identical. Not similar, not close, identical. Even the tiny break in the ink beneath the curve of the P appeared in exactly the same place. Someone had lifted my signature from the roofing document and placed it onto the loan paperwork. And the last person I remembered holding that roofing document was my son. I printed the email attachment and carried both pages downstairs. My kitchen looked exactly as it had 6 months earlier. Same oak table, same cream-colored walls, same ceramic bowl near the window. I could almost see Daniel standing there again with his clipboard. "Just sign here, Mom." Had he already been thinking about my signature then? The question made me feel sick. I forced myself not to jump ahead. Facts first. That was something Frank used to say whenever emotions threatened to take over. Facts first, Paula. Feelings second. So I went back upstairs. I opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. That was where I kept old insurance policies, property records, tax statements, and anything connected to the house. I began removing folders. Homeowner's insurance, property tax, roof repair, utilities, estate documents. I spread everything across the floor. At first nothing looked unusual. Then I noticed that the folder containing the deed copies felt thinner than I remembered. I had always kept 3 certified copies of the deed after Frank died. One for my records, one for the safe deposit box, and one extra because Frank believed important documents should never exist in only one place. There were only 2. I checked again, then again. 2. I sat back on my heels. Maybe I had moved one. I searched the desk drawers. Nothing. Then I checked the small fireproof box in the closet. Birth certificates, marriage certificate, Frank's death certificate, my social security card, passport, no third deed copy. I returned to the filing cabinet. My property tax folder contained statements from the previous 5 years. But the most recent detailed assessment, the one showing the current appraised value of the house, was missing. I knew I had received it. I remembered complaining to my neighbor about how much the county valuation had increased. I had filed it myself. Now it was gone. The bank had shown me a copy yesterday. My copy. Or something that looked exactly like it. My hands started trembling. I sat at the desk and tried to remember who had been in this room. Daniel. Rachel occasionally. My granddaughter once when she needed the printer. James Whitaker, my attorney, had never been upstairs. A plumber had come into the hallway bathroom but nowhere near the office. Daniel was the obvious answer. But I hated how quickly my mind was beginning to turn every memory of my son into evidence. After Frank died. Daniel had been wonderful to me. At least that was how I had remembered it. He changed light bulbs I couldn't reach. He took my car for inspections. He repaired the loose railing on the back steps. He came over every Sunday for almost 3 months because he knew evenings were hardest. And yes, he had helped with paperwork. "Mom, you don't need to keep all this junk," he once said while sorting through Frank's old business files. I had laughed. "Your father kept receipts from 1998. That's exactly my point." We spent an afternoon shredding outdated documents. Daniel carried the bags away because my shredder bin was overflowing. At the time I saw a son helping his widowed mother. Now I wondered what else he had seen. My phone rang. Rachel. I nearly ignored it. Then I answered. "Hello, Paula." Her voice sounded nervous. "Hi, Rachel. Can we talk?" "That depends on what you want to talk about." A pause. "Daniel. Of course. What about him?" "He came home yesterday completely shaken." I imagine he was. "Paula, I know you're upset." "Upset? I didn't mean it like that. How should I feel when I discover my name on a loan I never authorized? I know it looks terrible." I closed my eyes. Looks terrible. Another phrase designed to make facts smaller. "It doesn't look terrible, Rachel. It is terrible. I know. Daniel is under enormous pressure." "So he told you about the loan silence." "Rachel, I knew he was trying to get financing. That wasn't my question. He said there were different options. Did you know he used my name?" She hesitated too long. "I knew he had talked about you possibly helping." "Possibly helping, yes. He never asked me. I thought he had. That sounded rehearsed. I stood and walked toward the kitchen window. Across the street, my neighbor was trimming roses. Normal life continuing. Rachel, did you know the amount what the loan? Did you know how much Daniel was trying to borrow? Another pause. Not exactly. Then tell me approximately. I don't know, Paula. Was it 50,000, number 100,000? I really don't think $480,000. She stopped breathing for a second. Then she said, I know. I closed my eyes. You know, he told me yesterday. Yesterday when after everything happened. What time, Paula, does that matter? Yes. She became quiet. Around lunch. Daniel had left my house shortly before 11. It was possible, but something in her voice bothered me. What did Daniel tell you? That the bank froze the financing because there was a problem with the guarantor paperwork. The guarantor paperwork. Yes. Did he say the guarantor was me? Yes. Rachel began crying. Paula, please don't destroy Daniel over one mistake. My grip tightened around the phone. One mistake, he was desperate. You keep saying what he was. Desperate, pressured, afraid. Nobody seems interested in what he did. I'm not defending it. You just asked me not to destroy him. Because I know what happens if the loan disappears. What happens? She went silent. Rachel. We could lose everything. There was genuine fear in her voice. For the first time I heard something beneath the excuses. Panic. What do you mean everything? The company? Maybe the house. I don't know. Daniel doesn't tell me all the details anymore. That sentence surprised me. Why not? Because every time I ask, he says he has it handled. I knew that phrase. Frank had used it when Daniel was younger. When Daniel was 26 and had run up credit card debt buying equipment for a landscaping business that lasted 8 months, he told us he had it handled. When he borrowed money from Frank to pay a subcontractor during the first year of Murphy renovations, he had it handled. I had always thought confidence was one of my son's strengths. Now I wondered if it had sometimes been camouflage. Rachel, did Daniel ever tell you my house was involved? No. The answer came quickly. Too quickly. Did you know he had access to my documents, Paula? Did you? He helped you after Frank died? That isn't what I asked. She sighed. Yes, I knew he had helped with paperwork. I looked toward the ceiling, imagining my office above me. Some documents are missing. What, a deed copy? A property assessment? Oh my God. Her reaction sounded genuine. Did Daniel bring documents from my house to your house? I don't know. Think. I saw folders sometimes. What folders? Business things. Were they mine? I don't know. Her voice broke. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Rachel said something quietly. He didn't think you'd ever be responsible for it. I froze. What did you say? I mean the loan. He thought he could repay it. How the medical office project? It isn't signed. I know. My stomach tightened. You know that too, he told me. When? Last week. Daniel had told me yesterday that they were basically there. Rachel already knew there was no signed contract. How much trouble is the company in? I honestly don't know. You know more than you're telling me. I know he's scared. That isn't a number. She started crying again. I don't want to be in the middle of this. You're already in it. I know. I lowered my voice. Rachel, I need you to tell me the truth. Did Daniel plan to use my house? No. Not like that. What does that mean? He said the loan would be temporary. There was that word again. Temporary. Temporary debt is still debt. I understand. Apparently Daniel doesn't. He thought once the medical project came through, he'd pay down the loan quickly. And if it didn't, he had other options. What options? I don't know. Rachel. I don't. Then she stopped. I heard her inhale sharply as though she had almost said something she shouldn't. What? I asked. Nothing. What were you going to say? Nothing, Paula. Rachel. She began speaking quickly. I'm just asking you not to make any permanent decisions while you're angry. Let Daniel explain everything. He loves you. He made a terrible judgment call, but he wasn't trying to take your home. I said nothing. She continued. He was going to fix everything. How? I don't know. You just said he had other options. I meant business options. Which ones? I don't know. The silence between us became unbearable. Then Rachel said almost to herself, He was going to put everything back before you ever noticed. I stopped breathing. What did you just say? Another silence. Rachel. I worded that badly. No, you worded it very clearly. I meant the paperwork. What was he going to put back? Nothing. Forget I said that. I won't. Paula, please. I looked toward the staircase leading to my office. The missing deed copy, the missing assessment, my copied signature, my insurance information. What exactly, I asked slowly, was Daniel going to put back before I noticed it was gone? Rachel didn't answer. Then the line went dead. I stood alone in my kitchen with the phone still pressed against my ear. For the first time, I stopped wondering whether Daniel had crossed one desperate line. I began wondering how many lines he had crossed before the bank happened to call me. What exactly was he going to put back? I called Rachel back immediately. She didn't answer. I called again. Voicemail. Rachel, this is Paula. I need you to call me back. I ended the call, waited 30 seconds, then dialed a third time. Straight to voicemail. That told me she had turned off her phone. I stood in my kitchen staring at the screen. I was going to put everything back before you ever noticed. People sometimes reveal more in one careless sentence than they do in an hour of carefully chosen explanations. I walked upstairs and looked at the documents spread across my office floor. The missing deed copy, the missing property assessment, the roofing document containing the exact signature that had appeared on the loan guarantee. Maybe Daniel had taken documents intending to return them. Maybe Rachel knew that. But another question had become impossible to ignore. Why had Daniel needed $480,000 badly enough to do any of this? I had accepted his explanation too easily. Cash flow squeeze, late customers, over-budget project, payroll, materials. Those were problems, certainly. But were they $480,000 problems? I spent 32 years working in payroll administration. Numbers had always told me things people preferred not to say aloud. So I stopped listening to Daniel, and I started looking at numbers. Murphy Renovations was privately owned, which meant I couldn't simply pull up detailed financial statements. But Daniel had spent years talking about his business at family dinners. Names of projects, suppliers, customers, complaints about insurance, arguments with subcontractors. He had also used my email address years earlier when registering some of the company's original paperwork because he hadn't yet set up a proper office. I searched my inbox. Murphy Renovations. Hundreds of old messages appeared. Most were useless. Advertisements, receipts, old estimates. Then I found something from 11 months earlier. Subject account status action required. It was from a building supply company. I opened it. The email had been sent to Daniel with me copied accidentally. Outstanding balance, $63, $840. I remembered asking Daniel about it. He had laughed. Commercial suppliers always send scary emails. It's normal. At the time, I believed him. Now I searched the supplier's name. 3 more messages appeared. The balance had climbed. $71, $200, then $86, $450. The last email was 5 months old. Final credit hold notice. I felt my stomach tighten. I searched other vendor names I remembered. A flooring distributor, an electrical supplier, a tool rental company. Most produced nothing. But one search found another email Daniel had accidentally copied me on 7 months earlier. Past due $38, $900. 2 suppliers alone represented more than $125,000. I took out a notebook. Suppliers at least $125,000. I hated writing it. But facts first. Next, I searched county court records online. Murphy Renovations appeared twice. One case had been resolved. The second involved a subcontractor claiming unpaid invoices, $47, $600. I added it. Now I was above $170,000, and that was only what I could find from my kitchen. My phone rang. Daniel, I answered. Mom, we need to talk. Yes, we do. Did Rachel call you interesting? Why? Because she's upset. So am I. What did she say? I ignored the question. How much does Murphy Renovations owe? Silence. What total debt? That's complicated. Then simplify it. Mom, business debt isn't like personal debt. Money owed is still money owed. You don't understand how contracting works. That irritated me. I spent 3 decades managing payroll for a company with more than 400 employees. Don't speak to me as though I've never seen a balance sheet. I didn't mean, how much? He sighed. I don't have the exact number in front of me. More than 100,000, yes. More than 200,000, pause. Yes. 300. Why are you doing this? Because you tried to borrow $480,000 using my name. The loan wasn't just for debt. What else? Working capital. Payroll, yes. Materials, yes. Taxes, silence. That silence frightened me. Daniel, are your payroll taxes current? They're being handled. I closed my eyes. Are they current? There's a payment arrangement. My stomach dropped. How far behind, Mom? How far? It's not as dramatic as you're making it. I almost laughed. When people say that I've noticed, it usually means the number is worse than I expect. He didn't answer. Were you going to use the loan to pay taxes? Partly. So yesterday when you told me this was about expanding into a major medical office project, you weren't telling me the truth. I didn't lie. You left out the part where the company is already drowning. We are not drowning. What do you call owing suppliers, subcontractors, and taxes while borrowing nearly $500,000? A difficult quarter. I stared at the notebook. Is the medical office contract signed? We've received strong assurances. That means no. We're the preferred contractor. That means no. They're finalizing financing. That still means no. His frustration exploded. Why are you interrogating me like I'm a criminal? The word hung between us. I spoke quietly. Because my signature is on a document I never signed. He became silent. I continued. I compared it to the roofing completion form. Nothing. It's the exact same signature, Daniel. Still nothing. Did you copy it? No. Did someone in your office? I don't know. Who had the roofing document? My office processes hundreds of documents. That isn't an answer. I'm trying to tell you I don't personally scan every piece of paper, but you brought that one from my kitchen. He exhaled. I gave it to administration, who my office manager probably handled it. Name, Mom. Name, Karen. Did Karen know I was supposed to guarantee your loan? I don't know exactly what she knew. You're protecting someone. I'm trying to keep you from turning a business problem into a family disaster. I looked at my missing folders. You already did that. I ended the call. For the next 2 hours, I continued searching. I found evidence of delayed payments, a lien notice connected to a commercial renovation, a lawsuit that had been settled. Then I found an email I had forgotten completely. It was from Daniel, 4 months earlier. No subject line, only 3 sentences. Mom. Sorry that last email wasn't meant for you. Please delete it. Just internal planning stuff. Love, D. I remembered receiving it, but I couldn't remember what last email meant. I searched the messages immediately before it. Nothing. Then I checked my trash folder. Empty. But I had an old laptop downstairs that hadn't synchronized correctly in months. Frank used to tease me because I never threw away electronics. For once, my bad habit helped me. I turned on the laptop. It took nearly 6 minutes to start. I opened the email application and searched Daniel's address. There it was, the message he had asked me to delete. It had been intended for someone named Kevin. Subject: restructure options. The first paragraph discussed supplier balances. The second discussed a private lender. Then I reached the third. Kevin, the current issue is collateral. I don't want to tie up the house if I can avoid it. Once Mom's property is available, everything changes. There's enough equity there to clean up the short-term obligations and give us room to breathe. I read the sentence again. Once Mom's property is available, everything changes. Not if Mom agrees to help. Not if Mom chooses to invest. Once Mom's property is available. As though my home were a warehouse waiting to open. As though the only uncertainty was timing. I printed the email. My hands were cold when I picked up the pages. Daniel had told me the loan was temporary. He had told me I wouldn't lose anything. He had told me he was saving 11 jobs. But months before this loan application, he had already been discussing my property as part of his company's financial future. I called him again. This time he answered immediately. What now? I didn't respond to his tone. I found an email. Silence. You sent it 4 months ago to someone named Kevin. He didn't speak. You wrote, once Mom's property is available, everything changes. Mom. What does that mean? You're reading private business correspondence out of context. It came to my email, by mistake. That doesn't change what you wrote. You don't understand the conversation. Then explain it. He was silent for so long I could hear traffic through his phone. Finally he said, it wasn't about taking your house. Then what was it about the future? My future. Our family's future. No, Daniel. You wrote about my property. You've always said the house would come to me eventually. I felt something inside me go very still. I was 69 years old. Alive. Healthy. Standing in the home Frank and I had worked 34 years to pay for. And my son was already calculating what would happen when it became available. Daniel, I said quietly, when exactly did you expect my property to become available? He didn't answer. And that silence frightened me more than any number I had discovered. When my property is available. Daniel stayed silent long enough for me to hear a car horn somewhere behind him. I held the phone tighter. Daniel, I asked you a question. I heard you. Then answer me. You're twisting the wording. I'm reading your wording. It was a private conversation about long-term financial planning. My house is not part of your financial plan. I know that. No, apparently you don't. He exhaled loudly. Mom, you've said for years that everything would come to me eventually. There it was again. Eventually. A harmless word in most conversations. That morning it sounded like a countdown. I said you were my only child, I replied. I said your father and I wanted you to be secure someday. I never said you could start spending my estate while I'm still alive. I didn't spend anything. You tried to borrow $480,000 using my name. That loan was for the company, and the company belongs to you. I was trying to protect what I built, with what I built. He went quiet. I looked around my kitchen. Frank and I had bought this house when Daniel was 9. The carpet had been brown. The kitchen had avocado green countertops. The backyard was mostly weeds. For years, Frank worked 6 days a week selling building supplies while I handled payroll at a manufacturing company across town. We refinanced once when interest rates dropped. We replaced the roof twice. We remodeled the kitchen only after Daniel finished college because tuition came first. Nothing about this house had arrived easily. And now Daniel spoke of it as though it were a future line on his balance sheet. I need you to explain the email, I said. I already did. No. You told me I misunderstood it. Because you do. Then help me understand. He hesitated. Kevin is a financial consultant. For Murphy Renovations sometimes. And you told him that once my property became available, everything would change. It was hypothetical. What was hypothetical estate planning? I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. My estate planning, you asked. No, Daniel. I'm asking why you were discussing my estate planning with a business consultant. I wasn't discussing your will. Then what were you discussing? He became irritated again. Future capitalization. I laughed once without humor. You found a business phrase for waiting to inherit your mother's house. That's not fair. Fair. My voice rose despite myself. You put my name on a loan. You copied my signature. You used information from my personal files. And now I discover you've been discussing my house as future capital for your company. Tell me which part of my reaction is unfair. I did not copy your signature. Then who did I told you? I don't know exactly how the file was processed. Stop saying exactly. What? You keep hiding behind that word. You don't know exactly who processed it. You don't know exactly how much debt you owe. You don't know exactly what Rachel knew. You don't know exactly where my signature came from. I'm not hiding. You're giving yourself room to deny whatever I discover next. That silenced him. I had never spoken to Daniel that way before. Maybe that was part of the problem. For most of his life, I had interpreted his mistakes generously. When he was 19 and overdrew his checking account 3 times, I called it inexperience. When his landscaping business failed, Frank and I called it a lesson. When Murphy Renovations had trouble during its second year, and Frank lent him $28,000, we called it helping our son establish himself. Every rescue had received a kinder name. Maybe Daniel had learned from us that consequences were things his parents helped rename. His voice softened. Mom, I'm sorry. I sat down. For what? For scaring you. Not good enough. For the paperwork. Still not good enough. What do you want me to say? The truth. I am telling you the truth. No. You're telling me enough truth to keep me from walking away. He became silent. I looked at the printed email in front of me. Did you expect to inherit this house? Yes. At least that answer was direct. Why? Because I'm your son. That isn't a legal document. You told me. What did I tell you? That someday the house would probably be mine. Probably. I remembered saying something similar. It had been 3 Christmases earlier. Daniel had complimented the renovated kitchen and joked that he hoped Rachel liked the cabinets, because one day we'll probably be stuck with them. I had laughed and said, unless I spend every penny traveling first, this place will probably be yours someday. It was a joke, a mother's casual reassurance. I had no idea Daniel had filed it away as financial certainty. You understand that someday is not today, of course, do you? Yes. Because your email doesn't sound like it. He sighed. Kevin asked what assets might exist long-term, that's all. Assets belonging to whom? Our family. My house belongs to me. I know. Say it. What? Say your house belongs to you. He hesitated. I couldn't believe he hesitated. Then he said, your house belongs to you. And my savings yours. My retirement accounts yours. My life insurance. Mom, come on. Say it. They're yours. And none of them belong to Murphy Renovations. No. Then why were they being discussed? Because I was trying to understand every possible scenario. You mean every possible source of money? That's not the same thing. It is when the source is me. He muttered something I couldn't hear. What I said, I was under pressure. I understand pressure. What I don't understand is entitlement. That word changed the conversation. Entitlement. Yes. You think I feel entitled to your money. I think you started believing my future death was part of your business plan. That's disgusting. It was your email. I wasn't waiting for you to die. His voice cracked. For a moment I heard my son rather than the businessman defending himself. I lowered my voice. Then help me understand what available meant. I didn't answer. Eventually he said, there are ways property can support financing without anyone dying. My stomach tightened. What ways, Mom? I'm not doing this anymore. Daniel, I have employees waiting for me. I have vendors calling. I have a company to save. And apparently you thought I had a company to save too. That isn't what I meant. But it's what you expected. He ended the call. I sat at the table for a long time. I should have been furious. Instead, I felt something worse. Grief. Not grief for Frank. Grief for the version of my son I had believed in. I loved Daniel. That had not changed. But love and trust, I was beginning to understand, could separate. One could survive while the other broke completely. I went upstairs and opened the drawer containing my estate documents. My will was there. Daniel was indeed the primary beneficiary. After Frank died, everything had been simplified. The house investment savings after certain charitable gifts would largely pass to Daniel. I stared at his name. For years it had comforted me. Everything Frank and I built would stay in the family. Now I wondered whether Daniel had stopped seeing it as an inheritance and started seeing it as delayed access. My phone rang again. For one foolish second I hoped it was him calling back to tell me everything. It wasn't. The screen showed James Whitaker. James had been our attorney for more than 20 years. He had handled the closing when Frank sold his small building supply business. He had updated our wills. He had sat beside me at Frank's funeral. I answered. James, Paula. I got your message. I had left him a voicemail earlier that morning before calling Daniel. I'm sorry to bother you. You're not bothering me. You said there's a problem involving Daniel and a business loan. Yes. How serious? My signature is on a $480,000 guarantee I never signed. Silence. Unlike Daniel's silences, James's was not evasive, it was alarm. Paula, where are you at home? Do not sign anything, do not agree to anything, and don't give Daniel any documents. I won't. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? Yes. Bring everything the bank gave you. I will. And Paula. Something in his voice changed. What? There may be something in Frank's old estate file that we need to discuss. I straightened. What does Frank's estate have to do with Daniel's business? James paused. Possibly more than you realize. What are you talking about? I don't want to do this over the phone. James, you're frightening me. I'm sorry. That isn't my intention. Then tell me. Another pause. Years ago, Frank asked me what could be done to make sure certain family assets could never easily be used to cover Daniel's business debts. I stopped breathing. Daniel's debts. Yes. Why would Frank ask you that? That, James said quietly, is what I think you need to come in and hear. I looked at Daniel's name printed across my will. My husband had been dead for almost 5 years. Yet somehow, from a conversation I had never known existed, Frank had just stepped back into the middle of the room. And suddenly I realized something that frightened me almost as much as the forged signature. My husband may have seen this coming long before I did. My husband had warned me. James Whitaker's office had barely changed in 20 years. The same dark wooden bookcases covered one wall. The same brass clock sat on the corner of his desk. Even the leather chairs in front of him looked like the ones Frank and I had sat in when we first came there to prepare our wills. Back then, Daniel had been in his 20s. Frank had still been alive. And I had believed estate planning was simply about deciding what happened after we were gone. That morning, I began to understand that sometimes it was also about protecting what happened while you were still here. James came around his desk when I entered. Paula. He hugged me briefly. You look tired. I am. Sit down. I placed the folder from the bank on his desk. James was 71 now. His hair had gone almost completely white, but he still had the same careful manner I remembered from Frank's business years. He opened the folder. For the next 15 minutes, I said very little. James read. He studied the personal guarantee, the property information, the copy of my signature. Then I gave him the roofing acknowledgement. He placed the two signatures beside each other. His expression hardened. That's the source. That's what I think. I'd say that's considerably more than a theory. He looked at me. You signed the roofing document, yes. In Daniel's presence, yes. And then he took it, yes. James leaned back. Has Daniel admitted copying the signature? No. Has he admitted knowing your signature was on the loan documents? Yes. That made James sit forward again. Exactly what did he say? I repeated the conversation. I told him about the temporary paperwork, the electronic signature, the missing documents, Rachel's statement that Daniel intended to put everything back before you ever noticed. Then I showed him the email. Once Mom's property is available, everything changes. James read it twice. The second time his expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. You've heard something like this before, I said. He removed his glasses. Not those exact words, but something close. Yes. My heartbeat quickened. From Daniel, James looked toward the window. From Frank. Hearing my husband's name made something inside me tighten. What did he tell you? James folded his hands. Before I answer that, I need to be careful about attorney-client confidentiality. Frank and I had conversations connected to both joint estate planning and matters he discussed separately with me. James, he's dead. I know. And I'm his wife. I know that too. Then please don't make me drag this out of you one sentence at a time. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. About 7 years ago, Frank came to see me alone. 7 years. That would have been 2 years before his death. Why Daniel had approached him about financing. I stared at James. What financing? Murphy renovations. I knew Frank lent him money years ago. This was later. How much? Daniel wanted access to substantially more. How much? $250,000. I felt the air leave my lungs. Frank never told me. No. Why? Because he didn't want you caught between them. I almost laughed at the bitter irony. So he kept me out of it. Yes. What did Daniel want the money for? Expansion. At least that was how Frank described it. Daniel wanted to purchase equipment, hire additional crews, and pursue larger commercial contracts. That sounds exactly like what he says now. James nodded. Frank noticed that too. What happened? He refused. Immediately. Not exactly. He reviewed Daniel's numbers first. That sounded like Frank. He had spent nearly 30 years in the building supply business. He understood contractors better than most bankers did. What did he find? Daniel was growing too quickly. Receivables were stretched. He was using short-term debt to cover gaps. Frank believed another large loan would encourage him to take on even more risk, so he said no. Yes. I looked down at my hands. Did Daniel get angry? James hesitated. Yes. How angry? Enough that Frank remembered the conversation years later. My throat tightened. What did Daniel argued that the money would eventually come to him anyway. The room became very still. I looked at James. Eventually, yes. That word again. James nodded slowly. Frank told me Daniel said something along the lines of, "Why should I borrow from strangers when this will all be mine someday?" I felt as though someone had reached into my chest and squeezed. He said that while Frank was alive, yes. I turned toward the window. For several seconds I couldn't speak. Daniel had been in his mid-30s then. Not a reckless teenager. Not a frightened child. A grown man with a wife and a business. And Frank never told me. He wanted to protect you. From what? From seeing Daniel differently. That hurt most of all. Because it meant Frank had understood exactly what I was experiencing now. The moment when a parent realizes love has been mixed with expectation. When did you become involved? I asked. A few days after their argument. Frank came here. Yes. James stood and walked to a locked filing cabinet. He removed a thick folder. Murphy, Franklin, and Paula. Seeing our names together nearly broke me. He returned to his desk. Frank wanted to know whether Daniel could ever use anticipated inheritance as leverage with lenders. Could he? Not in any straightforward legal sense. An expected inheritance isn't the same as ownership, but Frank was worried about something broader. What that Daniel would pressure you. I looked up. Me. If Frank died first. I swallowed. He knew he probably would. Frank had already been dealing with heart problems by then. James nodded. He said you had a softer heart where Daniel was concerned. That sounds like him. I was worried Daniel might come to you with a crisis and persuade you to mortgage the house guarantee business debt or drain retirement assets. A tear slipped down my cheek. I wiped it away angrily. Apparently he knew both of us. James let me have the silence. Then he opened the folder. Frank asked me to help structure certain assets so they wouldn't automatically become easy tools for Daniel's business obligations. What assets? Primarily investments connected to proceeds from the sale of Frank's building supply company, along with portions of your joint estate plan. I frowned. But I control our investments. You control what belongs to you outright. Some other assets were placed into structures with protections and restrictions. Restrictions against Daniel, against creditors, and reckless use. That distinction mattered. Frank hadn't tried to punish our son. He had tried to build a fence. Why didn't I know you knew about the trust structure? You signed parts of the estate plan. I didn't know why. Frank presented it as standard asset protection. And I believed him. It was standard asset protection. He simply had a specific concern motivating it. I sat back. For the first time in days, I felt something other than fear. I felt protected. Not by money. By the fact that Frank had thought ahead when I had not. Then another question occurred to me. Did Daniel know? James looked at me. Know what that Frank had done this because of him? No. Did he know Frank refused the $250,000 because he thought Daniel was too risky? Daniel certainly knew the refusal. I can't say how much Frank explained. I thought about the email again. Once Mom's property is available. Maybe Daniel had assumed Frank's death removed the last barrier. Maybe he had looked at me and seen the softer parent. The easier parent. That thought hurt. James turned several pages. There was another conversation. My eyes lifted. What conversation? About 6 months before Frank died. My stomach tightened. Daniel again. Yes. What happened? Frank came in alone. James looked uncomfortable now. He asked me to keep something with his estate documents. What a letter. To me, not exactly. What does that mean? It was addressed to you, but Frank gave specific instructions about when I should provide it. I stared at him. When James reached deeper into the folder, he removed a sealed cream-colored envelope. My name was written across the front. Paula. I recognized Frank's handwriting immediately. My hands began trembling. What were his instructions? James didn't hand me the envelope yet. He said not to give this to you simply because he died. Then when James looked directly at me, if Daniel ever tried to use your assets for his business without your full and informed consent, my eyes filled. Frank had written those instructions almost 5 years ago. 5 years before the bank called. 5 years before my signature appeared on a loan guarantee. 5 years before I found Daniel discussing my house as future capital. James slid the envelope across the desk. He was very specific, Paula. I touched it but didn't open it. What did he think Daniel would do? I don't know everything Frank put in the letter, but you know why he wrote it? Yes. Why? James took a slow breath. Because Daniel had already made one promise to his father about your property. I looked up sharply. What promise? James nodded toward the envelope. I think Frank wanted you to hear that from him. I looked down at my husband's handwriting. Paula. One word. My name. And suddenly I was terrified to open it. Because whatever was inside had been waiting nearly 5 years for the exact moment my husband hoped would never come. The letter Frank left behind. For several seconds I couldn't open the envelope. My fingers rested on Frank's handwriting, as if touching the ink could somehow bring back the hand that had written it. Paula. He always wrote my name carefully. Even on grocery lists. Even on birthday cards. 41 years of marriage teaches you things about a person nobody else notices. I knew when Frank was worried by the way he cleared his throat before speaking. I knew when he was pretending not to be tired. I knew when he had bought me a present because he became terrible at making eye contact. But apparently, there had been something I had not known. He had been afraid of what our son might someday ask me to sacrifice. James remained silent. Finally, I slipped my finger beneath the envelope flap. Inside were 3 handwritten pages. The first line nearly broke me. Paula. If James has given you this letter, then something I prayed would never happen probably has. I stopped. My vision blurred. Take your time, James said. I nodded and continued. Frank wrote that he didn't know exactly what Daniel might do in the future. He didn't want to poison my relationship with our son by making me suspicious of a problem that might never happen. But he wanted me protected if it did. He reminded me of Daniel's request for $250,000. Then he told me something James had not. Daniel had not simply asked Frank for money. He had asked Frank to borrow against our house. I looked up. Did you know this? James nodded. Yes. I returned to the letter. Daniel had presented the idea as practical. Our home was paid off. We had substantial equity. Murphy Renovations had growing revenue. According to Daniel, it made no sense for dead equity to sit unused when it could help the family business expand. Frank hated that phrase. Dead equity. He wrote, a home is not dead because it isn't producing money. It is doing exactly what we worked for it to do. It is giving you security. I pressed my lips together. That sounded exactly like Frank. He had never been impressed by financial language used to disguise simple risk. The letter continued. Frank had reviewed Daniel's business records and discovered something that worried him. Daniel wasn't dishonest in the way Frank understood dishonesty then. He wasn't stealing. He wasn't hiding money offshore. He wasn't gambling. His problem was different. Daniel believed success was always one more loan away, one more project, one more piece of equipment, one more expansion. And whenever something went wrong, he saw future income as though it were already sitting in the bank. Frank wrote, he spends tomorrow to solve today, Paula. That works until tomorrow arrives empty. I had to stop again. Because that sentence explained my son more clearly than anything I had discovered that week. The landscaping business, the credit cards, the first loan from Frank, the unpaid suppliers, the medical office contract that wasn't signed, the $480,000 loan. Tomorrow would fix today. Until it didn't. I continued reading. After Frank refused to borrow against our house, Daniel became angry. He told his father that the property would eventually come to him anyway. Frank asked whether Daniel understood what he was saying. Daniel apologized. Then Frank made him promise something. Daniel promised never to use our house investments or retirement assets for Murphy renovations without our explicit permission. Daniel agreed. My hands started trembling. He promised him. James nodded. Yes. He knew. Yes. All the explanations Daniel had given me collapsed at once. Temporary paperwork, electronic processing, misunderstanding, desperation. He had known exactly where his father stood. And years later, after Frank was gone, Daniel had crossed the boundary anyway. I kept reading. Frank wrote that he forgave Daniel after their argument. He believed our son had been frightened and ashamed. He also believed people could grow. But he added something that felt written directly for the woman I had become 5 years later. If Daniel ever reaches for what belongs to you without asking, don't rescue him from the consequences. I read the sentence twice, then a third time. Tears dropped onto the page. Frank continued. You will want to help him because you are his mother. You will tell yourself that losing money is better than losing your son. But if keeping Daniel close requires you to let him take what isn't his, then you aren't keeping him close. You're teaching him that love means he doesn't have to stop. I covered my mouth. James quietly pushed a box of tissues toward me. I miss him, I whispered. I know. I've missed him every day, but right now, my voice broke. Right now I need him, James said softly. It sounds like he knew you might. I wiped my eyes and finished the letter. Frank didn't tell me to cut Daniel out of my life. He didn't tell me to disinherit him. He didn't tell me to punish him. That was important. Instead, he asked me to separate love from rescue. He wrote that Daniel was our son, whether he succeeded or failed. But his debts did not become our debts simply because we loved him. His fear did not become our obligation. His business did not become more valuable than my security. Then came the final paragraph. Paula, if you're reading this, I can't stand beside you and tell Daniel no. So I'm asking you to do something that may be harder. Say it for yourself, not for me, not because you're angry. Say it because what we built belongs to you while you're here, and your life is not Daniel's emergency fund. I lowered the pages. For a long time, neither James nor I spoke. The office clock ticked behind him. I remembered the clock in my kitchen while waiting for Daniel to arrive after the bank called. So much had changed since then. At first I had thought I needed to understand the loan. Now I understood the loan wasn't the deepest problem. The deepest problem was that Daniel had slowly changed the meaning of family. To him, my security had become available capital. My future inheritance plan had become his future financing. My signature had become a tool. And because he believed he could repay everything, before I noticed he had convinced himself that permission was unnecessary. I folded Frank's letter carefully. Can I keep this? Of course. I held it against my chest. Then James opened another folder. We need to talk about what happens next. The warmth I had felt from Frank's words disappeared. The bank. Yes. What do I have to do? They'll continue their internal investigation. But eventually, they will need a formal statement from you. They already know I didn't sign. They know what you've told them verbally. There is a difference between a conversation and a sworn written statement. My stomach tightened. What kind of statement? An affidavit confirming you did not authorize the guarantee, did not authorize use of your signature, and did not consent to your assets being represented in the application. I understood immediately. And then what happens to Daniel? That depends on consent to your assets being represented in the application. I understood immediately. And then what happens to Daniel? That depends on what the bank discovers and what actions it chooses to take. Could he be charged? James didn't soften the answer. Potentially. I looked away. That was the moment everything became real in a different way. Until then, the danger had been pointed at me. My house, my finances, my identity. Now I saw the danger pointing toward my son. I don't want Daniel in prison. I know. He's my child. I know that too. He made a terrible decision. Possibly several. I looked at him. James wasn't cruel. He was simply refusing to help me minimize what had happened. If I don't sign the affidavit, the bank may still act based on its own evidence. But your position becomes less clear. What if I tell them it was a misunderstanding? James was silent. I knew what that silence meant. Say it. You would be making a statement you know isn't true. What if I decide to approve the loan? Now I would strongly advise against that. But legally, we would need to examine the situation carefully. This is already under review. I looked down at Frank's letter. Don't rescue him from the consequences. It was easy for a dead husband to write. Much harder for a living mother to do. James leaned forward. Paula, there is another issue. What if Daniel or someone acting for him used your signature without authorization? This isn't simply about whether you want to help him financially. I know. It's about whether you are willing to tell the truth about what happened. That sentence hurt because it removed every comfortable disguise. I wasn't deciding whether to punish Daniel. I was deciding whether to lie for him. My phone vibrated inside my purse. I pulled it out. Daniel. A text message. Mom, please don't sign anything at the bank until we talk. I can fix this. I stared at those words. I can fix this. The same promise. Tomorrow fixing today. I showed the message to James. He read it but said nothing. I placed the phone face down. What did Frank say after Daniel promised never to involve our property again? James thought for a moment. He told me he hoped he'd never have to find out whether Daniel meant it. I looked at the envelope. Now we knew. I carefully returned Frank's letter to my purse. Then I asked the question I had been avoiding since I walked into the office. If the bank asks me officially whether that signature is mine, what do you think I should do? James looked directly at me. I can't make that decision for you. I know. But I can tell you what Frank would probably remind you. I waited. The signature may look like yours, Paula. The decision wasn't. I closed my eyes. That was the difference. My name was on Daniel's loan. My signature was on Daniel's guarantee. My house was in Daniel's paperwork. But none of those things represented my choice. And now, for the first time since the bank called, there was one document nobody could sign for me. The statement telling the truth. The decision that could destroy my son. I drove home from James's office with Frank's letter on the passenger seat. At every red light, I looked at the envelope. Paula. One word in my husband's handwriting had somehow become heavier than the entire folder of bank documents. I knew what Frank wanted me to understand. Love was not permission. But understanding something and living by it are two different things. By the time I pulled into my driveway, Daniel's truck was parked at the curb. He was sitting on my front steps. For one frightened second, I saw him as a boy again. Not 42, 12. The summer he broke our neighbor's window with a baseball and waited outside because he was afraid to tell Frank. Back then, I had sat beside him and said, "The mistake is already made. What matters now is what you do next." I wondered if he remembered. Daniel stood as I approached. "Where were you at James's office?" His face changed. "You went to a lawyer, I went to my lawyer." Why I stared at him. "Do you really need to ask?" He looked away. "Can we talk?" "Yes." Inside, I placed my purse on the kitchen counter. Daniel sat at the table. I remained standing. "What did James tell you enough? What does that mean?" "It means I know about the conversation you had with your father." His face went still. "What conversation? The one where you asked him to borrow against this house?" Daniel looked down. "That was years ago. You promised him you would never use our property for your business without permission. I was in a different situation then. The promise wasn't conditional." "Mom, did you make it?" He rubbed his forehead. "Yes." "Then why did you do this?" He didn't answer. I sat across from him. "Daniel, I'm tired. I'm tired of asking questions and getting explanations instead of answers." I panicked. "About what, the company?" "Why? Because everything started falling apart at once." His voice sounded different. The confidence was gone. He looked exhausted. I had 2 projects go bad. One client withheld payment over change orders. Another went into litigation with the property owner, and suddenly our invoice was stuck in the middle. I had suppliers tightening terms, payroll every Friday, insurance renewals, taxes. How much do you owe? He stared at the table. Daniel. Just over 300,000. My stomach tightened even though I had expected something close. And the $480,000 would clear the urgent balances and leave operating cash. For how long? If the medical project starts long enough, and if it doesn't? He looked away. That was the entire problem in one movement. If it doesn't, I'd find another contract. Tomorrow would fix today. His eyes snapped toward me. What your father wrote that about you. Daniel became pale. What did he write? He left me a letter. When before he died? Daniel leaned back. He wrote about me. Yes. What did he say that you keep spending tomorrow to solve today? Daniel gave a bitter laugh. Of course. What does that mean? Dad never believed in me? That isn't true. He never thought I could run a real company. He lent you money, and reminded me of it every time I wanted to expand. He was trying to stop you from doing exactly what you're doing now. Daniel stood abruptly. So this is what this is about. Dad gets to reach out from the grave and tell you I'm a failure, no. Then what? He told me not to rescue you from consequences if you ever reached for what belonged to me without asking. Daniel froze. For a moment I regretted telling him. Not because it wasn't true, because I could see how deeply it landed. He really wrote that, yes. Daniel turned away. I watched his shoulders rise and fall. Then something happened I wasn't prepared for. He started crying. Not dramatically, not loudly. He simply covered his face with both hands. I'm losing everything. My anger weakened. That was the terrible thing about being a mother. You can know someone has wronged you and still feel your heart break when they hurt. I stood. Daniel. He shook his head. I worked 12 years for that company. I know. I missed birthdays, vacations. I worked Saturdays, Sundays. Rachel almost left me twice because I was never home. He wiped his eyes. And now I'm going to lose it because of 3 bad months. Is it really 3 months? He didn't answer. No, I said softly. It isn't. He sank back into the chair. No. How long? About 18 months. That shocked me. You've been struggling for 18 months, not every month. Sometimes we caught up, then fell behind again. Yes. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because I was embarrassed. I believed that. Maybe for the first time, Daniel wasn't managing the story. I thought I could outwork it, he said. Then I thought I could borrow through it. Then I thought one big contract would fix everything. And when the bank wanted more security, he closed his eyes. I used you. The words were barely audible. Say it again. He looked at me. I used you. My throat tightened. Why? Because I thought I could put it back before it mattered. Rachel's words. There it was. You took documents from my office. He nodded. How many a deed copy? The assessment. Insurance paperwork. Anything else? No. Did you intend to return them? Yes. When after the loan closed. And my signature. He swallowed. I gave the roofing document to Karen and told her there was already a signature sample in the file. Did you tell her I had agreed? He didn't answer. Daniel. Yes. The word nearly crushed me. He had lied to his employee, too. Did Karen know the truth? No. She thought you were involved. I closed my eyes. So the plan had not required a criminal conspiracy. Only one lie repeated enough times. Daniel reached across the table. Mom, please. I pulled my hand away. What? Don't sign anything yet. James told me the bank will probably ask for a formal affidavit. I know. How do you know? The loan officer called me. What did you tell her? That there had been confusion? There wasn't confusion. I know that now. You knew it then. He looked down. Please just tell them we misunderstood each other. I stared at him. You want me to lie? I want you to give me a chance to fix this. How I can withdraw the application. I can say the paperwork was submitted incorrectly. Nobody loses money. You already submitted false information. Nothing was funded. Because the bank called me. I know. If they hadn't, I would have repaid it. You don't know that. I would have his voice echoed through the kitchen. Then he lowered it. You wouldn't even lose the house unless things went really bad. I stopped moving. Daniel seemed to realize what he had said, but it was too late. Unless things went really bad. Mom. No. I didn't mean, yes you did. I stood slowly. You knew. What you knew, my house could be at risk. Only under the worst possible circumstances. You told me I wasn't going to lose it. You weren't. But you knew I could. He stood. The risk was tiny. To you. I was going to repay everything. With money from a contract you don't have. I would have found a way. And if you didn't. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I thought of Frank. A home is doing exactly what we worked for it to do. It is giving you security. Daniel had taken that security and converted it into probability. A tiny risk. A worst-case scenario. Something acceptable because the thing being risked wasn't his. I looked at my and finally understood why Frank's letter had not told me what decision to make. Frank wanted me to see the decision clearly. This wasn't about whether I loved Daniel. I did. It wasn't even about whether I could forgive him. Maybe someday I could. This was about whether I would lie to protect him from something he had knowingly done. Daniel stepped toward me. Mom, please. I backed away. I need you to leave. Don't do this. Leave. If you sign that affidavit, the bank could investigate everything. I know. They could ruin me. I know. My employees could lose their jobs. I know. Rachel and I could lose our house. My eyes filled with tears. I know. Then how can you do this? I looked at him, and for the first time since the bank called, my voice did not shake. Because you knew exactly what you were risking. He stared at me. And you decided I should carry that risk without even being allowed to say no. Daniel lowered his head. I opened the front door. He walked past me without another word. At his truck, he turned around. I thought he might apologize. Instead, he said Dad would have helped me if he knew I was going to lose everything. I touched the envelope in my pocket. No, Daniel, I said quietly. That's the one thing I know for certain he wouldn't have done. He drove away. I closed the door. Then I walked into the kitchen, sat down, and called James. He answered on the second ring. Paula, I've made my decision. There was a pause. All right. Call the bank. My heart pounded as I said the next words. Tell them I'm ready to put the truth in writing. I told the bank the truth. The appointment was scheduled for 10 o'clock the next morning. I arrived at the bank with James beside me and Frank's letter inside my purse. I didn't need the letter for anything legal. I brought it because I needed my husband with me. Linda Carter met us in the lobby. Mrs. Murphy. Mr. Whitaker. Her expression told me this was no longer an ordinary banking problem. She led us into a conference room instead of her office. Robert Gaines from compliance was already there. A folder sat in front of him. Beside it was a single document, my affidavit. I knew what it was before anyone explained it. My mouth went dry. James touched my arm. You can read every word before you sign. I intend to. We sat. Robert spoke first. Mrs. Murphy, before we begin, I want to be clear that the bank is conducting its own review. Your statement is one part of that process. I understand. You are not being asked to determine anyone else's intent. We only need you to state what you personally did or did not authorize. That helped. I wasn't being asked to call my son a criminal. I wasn't being asked to predict what would happen to him. I was being asked to tell the truth. Linda slid the affidavit toward me. I began reading. My full legal name. My address. A statement confirming I had not applied for the commercial loan. A statement confirming I had not agreed to act as personal guarantor. A statement confirming I had not authorized Murphy Renovations, Daniel Murphy, or anyone acting on behalf of the company to pledge, represent, or use my assets in support of the loan. Then came the sentence that made my hands stop. I did not sign the personal guarantee presented in connection with the loan application, nor did I authorize any person to reproduce, copy transfer, or electronically apply my signature to that document. I read it twice. Daniel's face appeared in my mind. Not the 42-year-old businessman. The little boy who once crawled into my bed during thunderstorms. The teenager who called me from college because he had the flu. The young man who cried when Frank died. My son. James noticed my hesitation. You don't have to rush. I'm not rushing. I looked at Linda. If I sign this, what happens to the loan? The loan will not be funded permanently. Based on the information currently available, this application cannot proceed as submitted. There it was. The $480,000 Daniel believed would save his company was gone. What happens to Daniel? Linda glanced at Robert. He answered, the bank will complete its internal investigation. I can't promise or predict what actions may follow. Could you involve law enforcement? We could be required or choose to refer matters depending on what the review establishes. I felt sick. James spoke quietly. Paula, remember what you're deciding today. I knew. Not Daniel's punishment. My truth. I picked up the pen. Then I stopped again. Can I ask one question? Of course, Robert said. Did any money leave the bank? No. Not $1, not $1. Something inside me loosened. Whatever else happened, I had stopped it before money moved, before Daniel could spend it, before a debt carrying my name became harder to untangle. I signed. Paula E. Murphy. My real signature. For a strange second I stared at it. The same name, the same hand. But this time the choice belonged to me. James signed as witness where required. Robert collected the affidavit. It will be added to the investigation file. I nodded. My hands were trembling beneath the table. Linda closed the loan folder. The disbursement block will remain in place, and the application will be formally removed from funding status. So it's over. The funding is over. Something in her wording caught me. But not the investigation. No. I sat back. Daniel had spent days telling me that if I simply allowed the loan to proceed, everything could be fixed. Now there was nothing left for him to fix through that loan. The money was gone before it ever became his. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt exhausted. Then Linda said, there's something else you asked me about during your previous visit. What? You asked why we called you. I straightened. Yes. At the time, I couldn't discuss the verification issue because we were still confirming the sequence. And now we've established enough that I can explain what triggered the contact. Robert opened another folder. The loan file contained contact information for you, he said, including a telephone number designated for guarantor verification. Was it my number? No. A chill ran through me. I looked at James. He leaned forward. What number was provided? Robert did not answer directly. Before final funding, our system performed an identity reconciliation, using information associated with Mrs. Murphy's existing customer profile. I looked at Linda. I've banked here for years. 23 years, she said. Frank and I had opened our account there when Daniel was still in high school. Your established profile contained a different telephone number, Linda continued. The number you currently use. I took my phone from my purse. This one, yes. So the loan application listed another number. Yes. Why we cannot speak to anyone's motive. Of course. Facts first. I remembered Frank. What happened next, Linda explained. The system compared my long-standing customer information against the new loan documentation. Most details matched. Name, address, date of birth, property information. But the phone number did not. That alone wasn't necessarily suspicious. People changed numbers all the time. But because the loan involved a substantial personal guarantee tied to a business credit request, the discrepancy triggered additional verification. Normally, Linda said the verification team might begin with the contact information provided in the application. My stomach tightened. But they didn't. Not this time. Why? Because your customer profile was older and independently established. The reviewer chose to use the number already verified through your existing banking relationship. I stared at her. That decision had saved me. One employee had looked at 2 telephone numbers and chosen the older one, my real one. If they had called the number on the application instead, I couldn't finish. Robert answered carefully. We can't speculate about what would have happened, but I could. Someone might have answered. Someone might have claimed to be me. Or perhaps the call would have been redirected. Maybe whoever prepared the application expected verification to happen through that number. James asked, was the number added accidentally? We have no evidence at this point that allows us to characterize it as accidental. That was lawyer language. But I understood it. I turned to Linda. Yesterday you said there was an inconsistency that stopped the loan. Yes. This was it. This was the primary trigger. My hands became cold. Until that moment, some part of me had still been trying to believe the signature was the center of the deception. Daniel had panicked. Daniel had used an old signature. Daniel had convinced himself he would repay the money. Wrong. Terrible. But desperate. The telephone number felt different. A copied signature could be explained as a shortcut. A wrong telephone number specifically designated for verification suggested anticipation. Someone had expected the bank might call, and someone had apparently tried to control where that call went. Did Daniel provide the number I asked? Robert shook his head slightly. We're still tracing how individual fields were entered. Can you tell me whether it belongs to him? Not yet. To Rachel, I can't disclose unverified information. Murphy Renovations. He paused. We are investigating its connection to the business. My heart began pounding. Connection. Not random. Not a typo. James spoke. Has the bank contacted the number? Robert and Linda exchanged a look. Yes. I leaned forward. What happened? Robert answered. A voicemail system identified it as a business line. What business? We're confirming the ownership and routing before making a definitive statement. I already knew. I felt it before anyone said another word. Murphy Renovations. Robert did not confirm it, but he didn't need to. I remembered Daniel sitting in my kitchen. I didn't personally sit there and forge your signature. Technically careful. Always enough room around the truth. I looked at Linda. The first time you called me, Daniel called less than 10 minutes later. She nodded. I remember you mentioning that. How did he know? We can't answer that yet. Maybe the bank had contacted him. Maybe someone inside his office had seen the funding hold. Maybe there was another explanation. But now every possibility pointed toward planning. I opened my purse and touched Frank's letter. James noticed. Paula. I'm all right. I wasn't. But I was clearer. For days I had been asking whether Daniel had been desperate enough to cross a line. Now I was beginning to understand that he had not simply crossed one. He had prepared for what might happen after crossing it. I looked at Robert. You said you're tracing the number. Yes. When you know who controls it, will you tell me? To the extent we're legally able to discuss information directly connected to the misuse of your identity. Yes. I nodded. Then I asked the question that had been forming since Linda explained the verification process. If that number wasn't mine, who was supposed to answer when the bank called? Nobody spoke for a moment. Robert finally said, that is one of the questions we're trying to answer. I stood to leave. My affidavit was already signed. The loan was dead. Not $1 had reached Daniel. But as James and I walked toward the lobby, I realized the bank had just given me something far more disturbing than another forged document. They had given me evidence that somebody had planned for the possibility that I might be contacted. And whoever submitted that number had apparently hoped the bank would speak to someone other than me. The number belonged to someone I knew. The bank called me again 2 days later. This time I recognized Linda's number before I answered. Mrs. Murphy. Yes. We've confirmed additional information regarding the telephone number listed on the loan application. I sat down at my kitchen table. The same table where Daniel had tried to explain everything. The same table where I had signed the roofing document 6 months earlier. What did you find? And Linda paused. The number is associated with Murphy Renovations. I closed my eyes. Even though I had expected it, hearing the words made my stomach turn. What does associated mean? It routes through the company's telephone system. To Daniel, not directly. Then where? To an administrative extension. I tightened my grip on the phone. Karen. There was a short silence. We have spoken with the company's office manager as part of our review. That was enough. Karen. The woman Daniel had told me handled the roofing paperwork. The woman he claimed might have processed my electronic signature. Did Karen know the number was listed as mine? I can't discuss everything she told us. Linda, that number was put into a loan application under my identity. I understand. Was she supposed to pretend to be me? No evidence we've reviewed suggests that. That surprised me. Then why use her number? The information we currently have indicates she was instructed that any verification call concerning the guarantor should come through the office. By whom Linda hesitated. I think that is something you should discuss with Daniel. I almost laughed. I've been trying to discuss things with Daniel for a week. I know. What did Karen think she was supposed to do? Based on the information available to us, she believed you had already agreed to support the loan and that the office was coordinating documentation. I felt a strange combination of relief and disgust. Karen apparently had not been recruited to impersonate me. Daniel had simply created a version of reality in which everybody thought somebody else had already received permission. What would have happened if the bank called that number? The call would likely have reached the office. And then that depends on who answered and how it was handled. Did Karen tell you? Another pause. She understood that verification calls were to be transferred to Daniel. I stopped breathing. To Daniel. Yes. So the number listed as mine actually led to his office, and anyone calling to verify my guarantee would be sent to my son. That appears consistent with the routing instructions we have reviewed. I stood and walked toward the window. My backyard was bright with afternoon sun. Frank's old bird feeder moved gently in the breeze. Everything outside looked peaceful. Inside, another piece of my trust collapsed. Thank you for telling me. Mrs. Murphy, there is one more thing. What the bank has formally terminated the loan application. The funding will not proceed, I understand. Our investigation is continuing. Does Daniel know the business has been notified? Of course he knew. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I sat for almost 5 minutes doing nothing. I kept thinking about the architecture of the lie. My property documents. My copied signature. A phone number routed through Daniel's office. An employee who believed I had already agreed. None of it required a room full of dishonest people. It only required one person controlling what everybody else believed. I called Daniel. He answered on the 4th ring. What? No hello, no mom. Just what? The bank told me about the phone number. Silence. I want you to come here. I'm busy. I'm not discussing this over the phone. There's nothing left to discuss. You killed the loan. I told the truth. Same result. Come to the house. I have people here. Then come when they leave. He exhaled. Fine. He arrived just after 6. For the first time since the bank called, Daniel didn't wear his company shirt. He wore jeans and a gray sweatshirt. He looked older than 42. His eyes were red. Rachel knows I'm here, he said. I didn't ask, I'm just telling you. We sat in the living room instead of the kitchen. I didn't want that table between us again. The number, I said. Daniel looked at the floor. What about it? Why was Murphy Renovation's office number listed as mine? It wasn't the main office number. That doesn't make it better. It was a secondary line. Why? Because I needed the verification process to stay coordinated. I stared at him. Coordinated. Yes, that is a remarkable word. What do you want me to call it? The truth would be a nice change. He rubbed both hands over his face. I was afraid the bank would call you before I had explained everything, so you gave them a number that wouldn't reach me. I thought I'd have time. To do what? Talk to you. You submitted the application first. I know. So if the bank called your office, what were you going to say? I don't know. You had a routing instruction telling Karen to transfer guarantor verification calls to you. His head lifted. They told you that? Yes. He looked angry. Not ashamed. Angry. Karen shouldn't be talking about internal office procedures. I stared at him. That's your concern, no. It sounded like your concern. She's scared. Everyone is scared. Because of what you did. I know. Do you? He stood. Mom. I have spent the last 48 hours talking to lenders, suppliers, attorneys, accountants, employees. Do you think I don't understand? I think you've spent the last week understanding what this is doing to you. He looked at me. I'm the one whose company is collapsing. And I'm the one whose identity you used to try to stop it. He sat again. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, I asked, "What would you have done if the bank called that number?" Daniel stared at his hands. "I would have asked them to delay verification." "How, I don't know." "Would you have pretended to be me?" "No." The answer was immediate. I believed him. Not because I trusted him. Because impersonating me directly wasn't Daniel's style. His style was creating circumstances where he could avoid the direct lie. "Would you have told them I wasn't available?" "Probably." "Would you have asked them to call later?" "Yes." "And during that time, I would have talked to you." I almost smiled at the absurdity. "You mean you would have told me after the bank was already processing a loan in my name?" "I was going to explain that I needed your help." "No. You were going to present me with a crisis you had already created." His jaw tightened. "Maybe. Not maybe." "All right. Yes." It was one of the first directed missions he had given me. "Why didn't you ask before submitting the loan?" His answer came quietly. "Because I knew you'd say no." There it was again. The simplest truth. You knew my answer, so you removed my ability to give it. He nodded. "Yes." I felt tears gathering but refused to let them fall. "Did you think that was stealing number one? Number why? Because I wasn't taking your money. You were taking my choice." He looked at me. I continued. "You keep defining theft by whether dollars physically leave my bank account. But you used my identity, my house, my signature, my credit, my future. You decided all of those things were yours to borrow because you believed you could put everything back before I noticed." His face tightened. "I know how it sounds. Stop saying how it sounds." He looked away. "What was it I told you?" "I was trying to save the company. That isn't what I asked." I leaned forward. "If the loan had gone through and the medical project never happened, what was your plan?" Daniel didn't answer. "If Murphy renovations failed anyway, what were you going to do?" "I would have restructured." "With what sell equipment?" "That wouldn't cover everything." "Collect receivables." "And if customers didn't pay, they would." "And if they didn't?" He stood again. "I don't know." The words exploded out of him. Then came silence. For the first time I thought I had reached the end of his prepared explanations. I stood too. "You did know." "No, I didn't." "Yes, you did. Because you wrote it in that email." His face changed. "Once Mom's property is available, everything changes." I watched him remember. "You were counting on something after the loan. That wasn't a plan. What was it? A possibility." "What possibility?" He walked toward the window. "Daniel." "Nothing." I moved closer. "If the business failed, what was your plan?" His shoulders dropped. For several seconds he said nothing. Then very quietly he said, "I thought there would still be time." For what? He didn't turn around. "To make things right later." "With whose money?" Silence. "Daniel." He finally faced me. There was something in his expression I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not panic, shame. And suddenly I understood why he couldn't answer. Because somewhere inside his calculations, he had included money he did not own yet. Money connected to me. My estate. My house. My eventual absence. I felt cold. "You were counting on the inheritance." He closed his eyes. He didn't say yes. He didn't need to. And in that moment I realized the $480,000 loan had never truly been Daniel's final plan. It was only the bridge he hoped would carry his company long enough to reach money he had already begun thinking of as his. His real plan. Daniel kept his eyes closed. I stood across from him in the living room waiting. "You were counting on the inheritance," I repeated. His face tightened. "Not like that." Those 3 words had become almost predictable. "Not like that. It isn't what it looks like. You don't understand. Temporary paperwork." Every phrase did the same thing. It tried to move the truth just far enough away that he wouldn't have to stand directly in front of it. Then tell me what it was like. He opened his eyes. I never wanted anything to happen to you. I didn't say you did. I wasn't sitting around waiting for you to die. I didn't say that either. But that's what you're thinking. No, Daniel. What I'm thinking is that somewhere in your business planning you counted money you expected to receive from me someday. He looked away. Is that true? I thought there would eventually be assets. Eventually. Yes. My house. Among other things. I felt something cold settle inside me. Other things, investments, savings, whatever was left, whatever was left. My life reduced to a remainder. I walked to the chair beside the fireplace and sat. How much did you think there would be, Mom? How much I don't know. You discussed my property with Kevin. You were talking about future capitalization. Don't tell me you never estimated it. He rubbed his forehead. I didn't have an exact number. Approximate. Silence. Daniel. Maybe $1 million. I stared at him. $1 million. Between everything, you've been estimating my estate. It wasn't like I had a spreadsheet with your name on it. That isn't comforting. I knew the house value. I knew Dad sold his company. I knew you had retirement accounts. How, because we're family? No. How did you know enough to estimate the total? He became defensive. You and Dad talked about money, not numbers. Sometimes you did. I thought back. Maybe we had. A comment about the house appreciating. A mention that Frank's business sale had gone well. A conversation about retirement. Fragments. Daniel had assembled them. You took pieces of my life and turned them into a projection. That sounds horrible when you say it like that. How should I say it? He didn't answer. I leaned back. So explain the real plan. There wasn't one plan. Then explain the possibilities. He looked exhausted. If the loan went through, I would clear the urgent debts. Then keep operating. Then win the medical office contract. And if you didn't find another project? And if you couldn't? He hesitated. Sell equipment. We already discussed that. I know. And after the equipment, maybe restructure the company. With what, a smaller operation? Personal assets. Whatever made sense. Your house, possibly. Rachel knows that, his silence answered. And if that still wasn't enough, he stared at the floor. I thought I could carry some debt personally. Until when? He didn't answer. Until my property became available. His jaw tightened. I knew eventually there would be inheritance. The sentence was quiet, almost reasonable. That was what made it so disturbing. He truly believed it. You thought you could borrow against your future. In a way, my future. He looked at me. Yes, there it was. No more euphemisms. I felt strangely calm. Did Kevin encourage this? No. Did he know you were talking about an inheritance? He knew there might be future family assets. Did he know I was alive and had never agreed to use them? Daniel looked embarrassed. Yes. What did he say? He told me expected inheritance wasn't a financing strategy. For the first time in days, I nearly laughed. Apparently, Kevin had more respect for my property than you did. That isn't fair. It's accurate. Daniel sat down. I know how bad this is. Do you? Yes. Then say what you did. He looked at me. I used your name, and your signature, and your property information. And why? To get the loan approved. And why did you believe you could take that risk? His eyes filled. Because I thought I could fix it before it hurt you. That isn't the whole answer. He looked down. I waited. Finally, he whispered, because I thought someday I'd have the money anyway. There it was. The truth I had spent a week uncovering. Not greed in the simple sense. Not a son plotting to rob his mother and disappear. Something more dangerous, because Daniel had convinced himself it was reasonable. He thought he was borrowing from his own future. The problem was that his future was built out of my property, my savings, my death. My phone rang. Rachel. I looked at Daniel. Does she know you're here? Yes, I answered. Hello, Paula, is Daniel with you? Yes. Can I come over? I hesitated. Why? Because I'm done letting him speak for both of us. Daniel stood. Rachel doesn't need to come here. I covered the phone. Apparently, she disagrees. 25 minutes later, Rachel arrived. She looked terrible. No makeup, hair pulled into a loose ponytail. She sat on the sofa but refused to sit beside Daniel. "I need to tell you what I knew," she said. "All right." Rachel clasped her hands. "I knew the company was in trouble." "How long? About 9 months?" Daniel interrupted. "Rachel, no." She turned toward him. "You've had a week to explain this your way." Then she looked at me. "I knew there were unpaid suppliers. I knew we were behind on some things. I knew Daniel was trying to get financing. Did you know about the $480,000 eventually when, a few days before the bank called?" I remembered her hesitation during our first conversation. "Did you know my name was on it?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Not at first." "When did you find out?" "The night before the bank called." I felt sick. "What did Daniel tell you that you were helping?" I looked at my son. He said nothing. "Did you believe him at first?" And then I asked whether he'd talk to you. Daniel closed his eyes. He said he was going to. Rachel wiped her face. "That's when I knew something was wrong. Why didn't you call me?" She began crying. "Because I was scared. Of Daniel, no. Of everything." She looked around my living room. "Our house has a second mortgage. We owe money on the cars. The company pays part of our insurance. I thought if the business collapsed, we'd lose everything. So you stayed quiet." "Yes." The word came out broken. "I told myself Daniel would talk to you before the money moved. I told myself you'd probably help him anyway. I told myself it wasn't my place. But you knew." "Yes. That's why you said he would put everything back before I noticed." Rachel nodded. "He told me he had borrowed some documents from your office and would return them after closing." Daniel stared at the floor. I looked at Rachel. "Did you know he copied my signature?" "No." I believed her. Not because what she had done was acceptable. It wasn't. But her shame looked different from Daniel's. Rachel had not created the plan. She had discovered enough of it to know she should speak, and had chosen silence because the truth threatened her comfort. "I can't pretend that was okay," I said. "I know. You had my phone number. I know. You could have warned me. I know." She cried harder. "I'm sorry." I looked at Daniel. For the first time, he seemed completely alone. No business language, no wife defending him, no future contract, no bank loan, only consequences. "I need both of you to understand something," I said. They looked at me. "I love you. That has not disappeared." Daniel's eyes filled. "But you built plans around a future in which my property became yours." "Mom." "No. Let me finish." He stopped. "You treated my estate as though it were a delayed payment. You acted as though being my son gave you an advance claim on my life." "I know. No, Daniel. You need to hear what changes because of that." His expression shifted. "What do you mean?" I thought about my will upstairs. Daniel's name. Primary beneficiary. The assumption that everything would eventually flow directly to him. Frank had built protections around some assets, but I had left other things simple because I trusted my son. That simplicity was over. "Tomorrow morning," I said, "I'm meeting James again." Daniel became still. "Why?" "To change my estate plan." Rachel looked down. Daniel stared at me. "You're cutting me out." "I didn't say that." "Then what are you changing?" "Something I should have changed the moment I realized you had started counting my property as yours." His face hardened. "So Dad wins. This isn't about your father. It feels like it." "No, Daniel." I stood. "This is about me." For years my estate plan had been built around what Daniel might receive after my death. Tomorrow I would rebuild it around something far more important: how I wanted to live before it. I changed what he thought was his. The next morning I arrived at James Whitaker's office at 9. This time I wasn't carrying bank documents. I carried my estate folder. For years that folder had represented something simple to me: preparation, responsibility. A way of making life easier for Daniel after I was gone. Now I understood that an estate plan could send a message long before anyone died. And mine had accidentally sent Daniel the wrong one. "Everything will eventually be yours." James closed his office door. "Are you sure you want to do this today?" "Yes." You've been through a lot. That's exactly why I want to do it today. He sat across from me. I want to make sure this isn't punishment. It isn't. Good. I'm angry. But I'm not here because I'm angry. Then why are you here? I thought about the answer. Because Daniel treated an expectation like ownership. I helped create that expectation. James shook his head. Daniel is responsible for his choices. I know, but I can still correct mine. He nodded. All right. Tell me what you want. I don't want Daniel to be able to look at my house, my savings, or anything else I own and calculate when it becomes his. That can be addressed. I don't necessarily want to disinherit him. Those are two very different things. I know. That distinction mattered to me. I did not want revenge. I didn't want Daniel sitting in some future room after my funeral discovering that his mother had used her final decisions to hurt him. But I also refused to leave behind a structure that rewarded the exact entitlement that had brought us here. James explained several options. We could place additional assets into a revocable trust during my lifetime. I would remain in control. I could change beneficiaries later. I could sell the house if I wanted, move, travel, spend my own money. Nothing about the trust would prevent me from living my life. What changes for Daniel? His expectation. That was exactly what I wanted. We discussed provisions that would prevent distributions from automatically becoming available for business ventures or creditors. We discussed staged distributions rather than a single unrestricted inheritance. We discussed leaving a part of my estate to my grandchildren under protected terms. I also decided to increase charitable gifts to two organizations Frank and I had supported for years, a local food bank and a scholarship fund connected to the community college where Daniel had taken his first construction management courses. James looked up. You're comfortable with that? Yes. Even if it reduces what Daniel receives, I smiled sadly. That's the point I finally understand. What Daniel receives is whatever I choose to leave. It isn't something being reduced from an amount he already owns. James nodded. That is legally and practically correct. It was emotionally correct too. For the first time I saw my estate as mine, not Daniel's delayed inheritance. Mine. We spent almost 3 hours discussing details. Then James said something I hadn't considered. You also need to secure your present life, not just your estate. What do you mean Daniel had access to your house? Yes. Documents? Yes. Passwords? Some. Account information, possibly. I felt foolish. James must have seen it. Don't blame yourself. I gave him a key. He was your son helping after your husband died. Trusting family isn't unusual. But keeping everything unchanged after what happened would be foolish. That I agree with. I made a list. Change locks. Update online banking passwords. Replace email password. Add additional account alerts. Review credit reports. Place fraud alerts where appropriate. Inventory important documents. Move originals to secure storage. Remove any unnecessary authorized access. By the time I left James's office, the list was 2 pages long. It should have felt overwhelming. Instead, it felt like taking my house back room by room. I called a locksmith from the parking lot. He came that afternoon. When he removed the old front door cylinder, I felt unexpectedly emotional. Daniel had carried a key to my home for almost 15 years. I remembered giving it to him. For emergencies, I had said. He smiled. Don't worry, Mom. I won't throw any wild parties. Now the lock turned differently. A small sound. A huge boundary. That evening I changed passwords. The next morning, I met with the bank to update security preferences and add additional verbal verification requirements. I reviewed every account. Nothing else appeared missing. That gave me some relief. Then Daniel called. I almost didn't answer. But boundaries were not the same as silence. Hello, you changed the locks. Not hello, not how are you. You tried your key, I came by. Why to talk? You could have called. You changed the locks. Yes. Without telling me. I closed my eyes. The irony was almost painful. Daniel, you used my documents without telling me. That's different. No. It's exactly why the locks changed. He became quiet. Did you change the will too? James and I are revising my estate plan. So yes, I didn't say I removed you. What did you do that is private? I'm your son, and I'm still alive. He exhaled sharply. Rachel says I should leave this alone. Rachel is right. Are you giving everything away? There it was. Even now. Not. Are you okay? Not. Can we repair this everything? I'm deciding what happens to my property. Because you're angry. Because you taught me that my old plan was dangerous. How you thought you knew what was coming to you. You told me I told you that you would probably inherit the house someday. I did not give you ownership. I never said you did. You behaved as though I had. He became angry. So one mistake means my kids lose their future too. That sentence changed something in me. Your children's future is your responsibility. I know that. Do you? Of course I do. Then why are you counting on their grandmother's death to provide it? Silence. That's not what I meant. It is what you said. I softened my voice. I love Emma and Luke. I will make decisions for them because I love them, not because you're entitled to use them as an argument. You're punishing my family. No. Yes, you are. No, Daniel. I stood in my newly secured kitchen and looked around the house Frank and I had paid for. I'm finally protecting mine. He didn't speak. And I am part of this family too. The silence lasted several seconds. Then Daniel said, I have to go. He ended the call. 3 days later, James called to tell me the revised documents were ready for final review. 2 days after that, I signed them. My house was protected within the structure we had chosen. My remaining assets would be managed according to my wishes. Daniel was not erased. But the automatic future he had built in his mind no longer existed. I expected guilt. Instead, I felt peace. For the first time since Frank died, my estate plan reflected the woman I was now, rather than the mother I thought I had to be. Then the following Monday morning, my phone rang. It was Rachel. She sounded as though she had been crying. Paula. What happened? There was noise behind her. Voices. A truck. Something metallic being moved. Daniel's at the office. What's going on? The equipment company is here. I sat down. What equipment company? They're taking 2 of the financed vehicles back. My stomach tightened. Rachel. The bank loan is gone. One of the suppliers filed another claim. The accountant says there isn't enough cash to make payroll Friday. I closed my eyes. I knew what she was about to say before she said it. Murphy Renovations is shutting down. The words hurt. I had wanted Daniel stopped before he could drag me into his collapse. I had never wanted the collapse itself. But as I sat there listening to Rachel cry, I remembered Frank's warning. Do not rescue him from the consequences. For 12 years, Daniel had built a company. For 18 months, he had tried to outrun its problems. For one desperate week, he had tried to make my life carry them. Now there was nowhere left to move the weight. Murphy Renovations was falling. And this time, Daniel would have to stand underneath the consequences of his own decisions. When the business collapsed, Murphy Renovations did not disappear in one dramatic afternoon. I think part of me expected that. A locked door. A bankruptcy notice. Daniel standing in an empty office while everything he had built vanished around him. Real failure was slower, and somehow that made it harder to watch. The first things to go were 2 financed work trucks, then a skid steer, then specialized equipment Daniel had purchased during an expansion 2 years earlier. He sold tools, canceled leases, closed supplier accounts. 3 employees left almost immediately after hearing payroll might be delayed. Others stayed long enough for Daniel to finish 2 smaller jobs and collect enough money to pay part of what they were owed. I learned most of this through Rachel. Daniel stopped calling me. I didn't chase him. That was harder than I expected. For 42 years, when my son hurt, my instinct had been to move toward him. When he was 8 and broke his wrist, I sat beside his hospital bed. When he was 17 and didn't make varsity baseball, I made his favorite dinner. When his first business failed, Frank and I helped him recover. When Murphy Renovations struggled during its early years, Frank lent him money. Now Daniel was experiencing the largest failure of his adult life. And I stayed home. Not because I didn't love him, because for the first time loving him required me not to interfere. One Thursday afternoon, Rachel called. "Paula, can I ask you something?" Her voice was careful. "You can ask." "Daniel needs about $28,000 to settle two supplier balances. If he does, his attorney thinks they might avoid additional legal action." I closed my eyes. There it was. Not from Daniel. From Rachel. "Are you asking me for the money?" "No." But she had called. I waited. She sighed. "I don't know why I called." "Yes, you do. I guess I hoped." Her voice faded. "That I would offer." She began crying. "I'm sorry. I'm not angry. We're scared. I know. Our house may have to be sold. I know. Daniel says if he could just get through the next 60 days, Rachel." She stopped. I hated what I had to say. "Do you hear it?" "What 60 days?" Silence. "That's the same story. One more loan, one more project, one more month." She sniffed. "What are we supposed to do? Talk to your attorney, talk to the accountant, sell what you need to sell, negotiate what can be negotiated. And if that isn't enough, then you face what happens next." It sounded cruel, but cruelty would have been giving them another temporary bridge and pretending the river wasn't getting wider. "I'm sorry," Rachel whispered. "So am I." I ended the call and cried for 20 minutes. Boundaries did not make pain disappear. Sometimes they simply stopped pain from spreading. Within 6 weeks, Murphy Renovations had effectively ceased operating. Daniel sold the remaining equipment that had meaningful value. The small office lease was terminated. The company's sign came down. The 11 employees Daniel had used as part of his argument for the $480,000 loan found different outcomes. Several found work quickly. 2 joined another renovation company. 1 started working independently. A few struggled. I felt terrible for them. But I reminded myself of something James had said. Daniel had not protected those jobs by trying to involve me. He had delayed facing the truth about whether the company could sustain them. 3 months after the bank called me, Rachel and Daniel listed their house. That hurt too. I had watched them buy it. Frank had helped Daniel install shelving in the garage. I had planted hydrangeas beside the back patio with Rachel. But their mortgage, second mortgage, and other obligations had become too heavy. They moved into a rental townhouse 20 minutes away. Daniel still didn't call. Then one Saturday morning, I saw his truck, an older pickup, now pull into my driveway. He didn't try the door. That mattered. He knocked. I opened it. "Hi, Mom." "Hello, Daniel. Can I come in?" "Another thing that mattered?" he asked. "Yes." We sat in the kitchen. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He looked different, thinner. No embroidered company shirt, no expensive watch, no phone constantly buzzing with subcontractors and clients. Just Daniel. "I got a job," he said. I hadn't expected that. Where Carolina Commercial Builders. I knew the company. Frank had sold materials to them years earlier. "What are you doing, project manager?" "That sounds like a good position." "It is." "When do you start?" "Already did." "Monday." I smiled despite myself. "Congratulations." "Thanks." He looked embarrassed. "I haven't worked for somebody else since I was 30. How does it feel?" "Awful." I laughed before I could stop myself. To my surprise, Daniel laughed too. Then his expression became serious. And kind of good. "Why, at 5:30 I go home." That sentence carried more weight than it should have. "No payroll. No payroll," he repeated. "No vendor calls at midnight. No wondering whether one delayed invoice means I can't pay 6 other bills." He stared at his coffee. I didn't realize how afraid I was all the time. I listened. He continued. "Rachel and I started counseling. I'm glad. I didn't want to. I assumed." That produced a faint smile. The counselor asked me why I kept borrowing instead of shrinking the company. "What did you say?" "That shrinking felt like failure, and borrowing didn't. Borrowing felt temporary. There was that word. But this time Daniel heard it too. He shook his head. Everything was temporary. He looked around the kitchen. The credit cards were temporary. Dad's loan was temporary. Supplier balances were temporary. The tax arrangement was temporary. And my guarantee, his eyes met mine. Temporary. I said nothing. Daniel swallowed. I kept thinking if I could get through the next problem, I'd become the person who could handle everything. Did you know? His voice broke. I became the person who hid everything. For the first time since this began, I felt something inside me soften, without warning me to be careful, not trust, not yet, but compassion. Daniel wiped his eyes. I need to tell you something. All right. I was angry when you stopped the loan. I know. I blamed you when the company closed. I know that too. I told Rachel you destroyed 12 years of my life. That hurt, but I let him continue. Then the accountant made me go through every obligation one by one. He looked down. Even with the $480,000, I probably would have failed. I had suspected it. Hearing him say it was different. The loan would have bought time, he continued. Maybe 6 months. Maybe 9 if the medical project happened. And then I would have needed more. He laughed bitterly. I always needed more. I thought of Frank's letter. He spends tomorrow to solve today. Your father knew. Daniel nodded. I hated him for knowing. We sat quietly. Then I asked the question I had wanted him to answer honestly for months. What do you call what you did to me now? He looked confused. The loan. Yes. You already know. I want to hear you say it. Daniel stared at his hands. I used your name. That's what happened. What do you call it? He breathed slowly. I kept calling it borrowing. I waited. Because borrowing sounded like something I could repay. His eyes filled. But you didn't lend it to me. No. You didn't even know. No. So it wasn't borrowing. I felt tears rising. What was it? He looked directly at me. Taking. One word. No excuse attached. No but. No explanation. Taking. For the first time, Daniel had named what he had done without trying to make it smaller. He cried then. So did I. I did not tell him everything was fine. It wasn't. I did not hand him a new key. I did not promise to restore the old estate plan. I simply reached across the kitchen table and took his hand. I love you, I said. I know. I haven't stopped. I know. But love isn't going to erase what happened. He nodded. I don't want it to. That answer surprised me. Then what do you want? A chance to become someone you can believe again. I squeezed his hand once. That will take time, I know. After he left, I stood at the window and watched him drive away. He had lost his company, his house, much of what he had spent 12 years building. But perhaps losing those things had finally forced him to see what no loan could have taught him. Failure was survivable. Shame was survivable. Starting over was survivable. And asking for help was survivable. What nearly destroyed us was his belief that love gave him permission to take help before it was offered. For the first time since the bank called, I allowed myself to imagine that Daniel and I might someday have a relationship again. Not the old one. That relationship had depended too much on assumptions. Maybe we could build something smaller, slower, more honest. Something neither of us would have to borrow against tomorrow to keep alive today. The money he never got. A year after the bank called me, I was standing in my kitchen when I noticed something I hadn't heard in a long time. Daniel laughing. Not the loud, confident laugh he used to give clients when he was trying to reassure them that a project was under control. This was different. Easy. Unforced. He was sitting at my kitchen table with Rachel telling me about a superintendent at Carolina Commercial Builders who had accidentally ordered enough bathroom tile for 3 floors instead of 1. And for once Daniel said it wasn't my money. Rachel laughed. I did too. There had been a time when I thought we would never sit together like that again. We weren't the same family we had been before the loan. I no longer wanted us to be. The old version of our family had contained too many assumptions. Daniel assumed I would always rescue him. Rachel assumed silence was safer than conflict. And I assumed love could compensate for weak boundaries. We had all been wrong. Daniel was still working as a project manager. 6 months earlier, his supervisor had offered him a raise and responsibility for larger commercial jobs. When Daniel told me, I asked whether he had any plans to start another company. He laughed. Not anytime soon. That answer relieved me more than I admitted. He had spent years believing ownership meant success. Now he was learning there was dignity in simply doing good work. He arrived at the office around 7 each morning. He left most evenings before 6. He received a paycheck. Taxes were withheld. Insurance was provided. He didn't lie awake wondering whether 11 other families could make their mortgage payments because a customer had delayed an invoice. For the first time in years, Daniel had weekends. He and Rachel were still in the townhouse. Their old house had sold for enough to satisfy the mortgage and most of the second loan, but they walked away with very little. Daniel sold his newer truck and bought the used one I had seen in my driveway months earlier. Rachel returned to part-time work at a dental office. They budgeted, really budgeted. No pretending future income had already arrived. No financing vacations. No replacing cars because a payment fit the monthly cash flow. They were rebuilding slowly. Daniel hated slowly. That might have been why it was good for him. The bank's investigation had eventually concluded without the disaster I had feared most. Because the loan had been stopped before disbursement, no money had been lost by the lender. But the false information and unauthorized signature remained serious matters. Daniel had to cooperate fully. So did Karen. The bank permanently closed the application and ended its business relationship with Murphy Renovations. Daniel spent months dealing with attorneys, compliance questions, creditor negotiations, and the consequences surrounding the company's collapse. There was no magical escape. There was also no prison sentence. What remained was a documented financial disaster that followed him long enough to make pretending impossible. And perhaps that was exactly what he needed. Not destruction. Consequences. Our relationship rebuilt more slowly than his finances. At first, Daniel came for coffee once every few weeks. He always called first. Always. The first time he asked, "Can I come over Saturday?" I nearly cried. Such a small question. But after everything that happened, permission mattered. I never gave him another key. He never asked for one. I didn't change my estate plan back either. Daniel remained a beneficiary, but not in the way he had once expected. My grandchildren had protected provisions. The charities Frank and I loved remained included. Certain distributions would be controlled rather than handed over as unrestricted capital. Most importantly, the house remained mine in every sense that mattered while I was alive. One afternoon, Daniel asked about it. Not the inheritance, the house itself. "Have you ever thought about selling? Why?" He immediately raised his hands. "Not because I want anything." I smiled. "I know." That was when I realized something had changed. A year earlier, I would have suspected him instantly. Now I believed the question was only a question. "I've thought about downsizing eventually," I said. "Would you?" "Maybe. You could travel." "I could. Dad always wanted to see Alaska." My throat tightened. "Yes." Daniel smiled. "You should go." A year earlier, he had looked at my home and seen equity. Now he looked at it and saw a way I might enjoy my own life. That mattered more than any apology. Still, the apology came. It happened after dinner on the anniversary of Frank's birthday. Rachel had gone home early because she had work the next morning. Daniel stayed to help me put dishes away. When the kitchen was clean, he stood by the table. "Mom." "Yes, I've apologized before." "You have." But I always explained afterward. I knew exactly what he meant. "I'm sorry, but I was desperate. I'm sorry, but I thought I could repay it. I'm sorry, but the company was collapsing." Every apology had carried a small escape hatch. Daniel pulled out a chair. "Can I say it again?" I sat across from him. "All right." He looked at me. "I used your name without permission." I said nothing. "I let my office use your signature on a document you never signed. I took papers from your house. I put a phone number on the application that was designed to keep the bank from reaching you directly." His voice shook. "I did those things because I wanted money I couldn't get, honestly." That sentence hurt, but I needed to hear it. I told myself I was borrowing from the future because that sounded better than admitting I was taking something from you in the present. His eyes filled. "And when you stopped me, I blamed you for what happened next. A tear slipped down his cheek. You didn't destroy my company. I waited. I did. For a moment, the only sound in the kitchen was the clock. Tick, 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 the same clock I had listened to while waiting for Daniel the morning this began. I forgive you, I said. Daniel closed his eyes. But I need you to understand what forgiveness means to me. He nodded. It means I don't want to carry anger toward you for the rest of my life. Another nod. It does not mean pretending it never happened. I understand. It does not mean restoring every boundary to where it used to be. I know. And it does not mean trust automatically comes back, because forgiveness does. Daniel wiped his face. I know that too. I reached across the table. Trust grows from what you do after you're forgiven. He took my hand. I'll keep working on it. That was enough. Not a promise that everything would return to normal. Something better. A promise to keep working. Later that evening after Daniel left, I made myself tea and sat alone at the kitchen table. I thought about the first phone call. 9:17 on a Tuesday morning. Mrs. Murphy, before we release the $480,000 we need to confirm. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if Linda had called 10 minutes later. What if the money had already moved? What if Daniel had paid suppliers, payroll taxes? What if the loan had become tangled through dozens of transactions before I knew my name was attached? Maybe I would have spent years trying to protect this house. Maybe I would have used retirement savings to settle the debt. Maybe I would have rescued Daniel again. But Linda called before he could spend $1. For months I thought that phone call saved me. It did. But it wasn't the most important thing that saved me. The real turning point came later. It came when Daniel sat across from me crying, and I finally understood that his pain did not create an obligation for me to surrender my boundaries. It came when I signed my own name beneath the truth. It came when I changed the locks. It came when I changed my estate plan. It came when I refused to provide another $28,000 after the company began collapsing. And it came when I realized something mothers are sometimes afraid to say aloud. You can love your child deeply and still tell them no. Sometimes no is the most loving word you have left. Today I still live in the house Frank and I paid off together. Maybe someday I'll sell it. Maybe I'll finally take that Alaska trip. Maybe I'll spend more of my savings than Daniel once expected. That's all right. Because my life is not an inheritance waiting to happen. Daniel lost Murphy Renovations. But slowly he began building something I believe may matter more. Character. And I gained something too. Not money, not revenge, something quieter. I learned that forgiveness does not require returning the keys to someone who once entered places they had no right to enter. Sometimes healing means opening the door again. But this time they knock first. Kethuk Fan 15. For most of my life, I believed being a good mother meant keeping my child safe from pain. Now I understand there is a difference between protecting someone and protecting them from the consequences of their own choices. Daniel almost cost me more than money. He nearly cost me the sense that my home, my identity, and my future belonged to me. And the hardest truth was that he didn't see himself as a thief. He saw himself as a frightened son borrowing from a future he assumed would eventually belong to him. That is why boundaries matter. Love does not give anyone ownership of your savings, your property, your signature, or your choices, not even your children. Forgiveness matters too. I forgave Daniel because I wanted a relationship with my son that wasn't built on permanent anger. But forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. Forgiveness can happen in your heart. Trust must be rebuilt through behavior. I could forgive my son without giving him another key. I could love him without restoring the old estate plan. I could celebrate his progress without financing it. And I could help him emotionally without becoming responsible for every problem he created financially. Perhaps that is one of the hardest lessons we learn as parents. Sometimes rescuing an adult child does not teach them how deeply we love them. It teaches them that someone else will always absorb the consequences. Daniel finally began changing when there was nobody left to absorb his. So let me ask you something. If you had been in my position, would you have told the bank the truth, even knowing what it might do to your son? Would you have changed your estate plan afterward, or would you have given him another chance? Tell me what you think in the comments. I especially want to hear from those of you who have had to choose between helping someone you love and protecting your own boundaries. And if stories about family betrayal, forgiveness, and finding the strength to stand up for yourself mean something to you, subscribe and stay with me for the next one. Sometimes the most important stories aren't about getting revenge. They're about finally understanding that protecting your peace is not the same as withholding your love. What Paula learned through this painful experience is something many parents spend a lifetime struggling to accept. Loving your children does not mean surrendering yourself to them. For years, Paula believed that being a good mother meant being available whenever her son needed her. But there is an enormous difference between helping someone and allowing them to use your love as permission. Daniel did not simply reach for his mother's money. He reached for her identity, her security, and her right to make decisions about the life she had spent decades building. And perhaps the saddest part was that he had convinced himself it was temporary. That is how boundaries are often crossed, not always through cruelty, but through entitlement, disguised as necessity. Someone tells themselves they will replace what they took, repair what they damaged, or explain everything later. But good intentions cannot replace consent, and desperation does not erase responsibility. Paula's greatest victory was not stopping a $480,000 loan. It was learning to say no without believing that saying no made her a bad mother. She discovered that forgiveness does not require forgetting, and love does not require restoring trust before it has been earned. She could forgive Daniel while keeping her new locks. She could love him while protecting her estate. She could encourage his recovery without financing another rescue. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for someone is allow them to experience the consequences that finally teach them what our rescuing never could. And sometimes healing does not mean returning to the relationship you had before. It means building a healthier one from the truth. If you were in Paula's position, what would you have done? Would you have told the bank the truth, even knowing the consequences your son might face? And after a betrayal like this, could you forgive him while still keeping those boundaries? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your experience may be exactly what someone else reading needs to hear today. And if you believe stories about family, betrayal, forgiveness, dignity, and second chances deserve to be told, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next story.